The cold came not with a storm, but with silence. It began at the edges of the Malfoy estate. Fringes of ivy along the outer walls glazed in glassy frost by morning. The gardeners spoke of breath that hung too long in the air, of fingers numbing in seconds despite thick gloves. By the third day, the trees in the west orchard stood encased in ice that shimmered like silver veins, their branches frozen mid-sway, as if caught in a breathless scream. Draco stood at the window of his study, his breath misting the glass as he watched the eastern hedge unravel into crystalline fractals. The frost was no longer content to linger. It spread, creeping up stone like ivy, blooming in delicate spirals across the flagstones. He hadn't slept in 2 nights, not since the first whisper in the dark, a voice that curled through the corridors like smoke, speaking in a language that prickled his blood. He pressed a hand to the cold pane. The glass cracked beneath his palm with a sound like a snapped bone. Malfoy. He turned. Hermione stood in the doorway, wrapped in a heavy wool cloak lined with enchanted fur. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, her breath visible in short clouds. In her hand she clutched a rolled parchment sealed with black wax, and a sigil that made his stomach twist, a crescent moon pierced by a thorn. "You felt it too, then," he said, voice low. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "All of Wiltshire feels it. The Ministry's in denial, of course. Claims it's an anomalous weather pattern, but the Muggle news says the same. Temperatures dropped 12 degrees overnight without explanation. Crops are dead. Livestock frozen in their pens." She unrolled the parchment. "This arrived by owl this morning, addressed to both of us." Draco crossed the room, eyes narrowing. The script was archaic, looping and sharp, ink the color of dried blood. He read aloud, stumbling over the syllables. "By right of blood and binding oath, the heirs of the pledged houses shall present themselves before the court beneath the stone. 1 moon hence, or the frost shall claim what warmth remains." Hermione exhaled sharply. "There's a footnote. The winter court awakens. The debt is called." They looked at each other, the weight of the words settling between them like snow. "This is madness," Draco muttered, though his hands trembled. "The winter court. That's myth. Children's stories." "Is it?" She moved to the window, peering out at the frozen garden. "Look at this. This isn't natural magic. It's older. I've seen traces of it. Fragments in the Black family archives, in old treaties between pure blood houses and things they shouldn't have bargained with." She turned to him. "Your family, mine, the Longbottoms, the Greengrasses, were all named in those documents. Blood pacts. Promises made before Hogwarts was built." Draco let out a bitter laugh. "So we're being blackmailed by ghosts?" "No," she said softly. "By something very much alive." A sound rose from beneath the earth, a low resonant hum like a cello string drawn across stone. The floor trembled. Frost spiderwebbed across the ceiling. They both froze. Then from the basement, once a wine cellar, now sealed behind iron doors that hadn't been opened in decades, came a knock. Not loud. Polite. Almost. 3 times. Draco backed away. That wasn't there before. Hermione drew her wand, the tip glowing faintly blue. "Whatever it is, it's been waiting." Outside the wind howled, though not a leaf stirred. The ice on the trees pulsed faintly, like a slow, sleeping heart. The wind howled through the skeletal trees beyond the Malfoy manor, rattling the ancient glass panes with a sound like fingernails on stone. Draco stood by the study window, a tumbler of untouched brandy in one hand, staring into the darkness. Frost had begun to creep across the outer surface of the glass, not in random patterns, but in deliberate curling script. Letters formed of ice, sharp and glimmering under the dim glow of the silver sconces. He leaned closer, breath fogging the pane, and read the words inscribed in the cold. "Draco Lucius Malfoy, scion of House Malfoy, blood of the Oathbreaker, you are summoned. The debt is called, the court remembers. Attend before the first moon of winter's return, or the land will answer in frost and silence." The glass beneath the words was freezing. He pulled back, pulse quickening. Not magic as he knew it, not wandwork, not incantation. This was older. The air in the room had grown heavy, tasting of snow and something else. Iron, perhaps, or the scent of the storm before lightning strikes. A shiver ran down his spine, though his cloak was thick wool lined with mink. He turned to the hearth. The fire had dimmed to embers, and when he waved his wand at it, the flames refused to rise, not extinguished, denied, as if the very warmth had been forbidden. "This is impossible," he muttered, more to the shadows than to himself. But the Malfoy library held records older than Hogwarts, whispered histories, bound in leather stitched with human sinew. He had once dismissed them as ancestral bragging, tales of pacts with spirits, bargains struck beneath glacial mountains. His father had called them superstition, but Lucius had also taught him never to ignore a summons. Draco wrapped his cloak tighter, and strode to the hidden panel behind the bookshelf. The latch opened with a whisper of old metal, revealing a narrow staircase descending into blackness. The air below smelled of damp parchment and something faintly metallic, like blood on stone. He lit his wand, the narrow beam cutting through centuries of dust. There, beneath layers of wax-sealed folios, he found it, the Codex Aeternum, its cover rimed with frost despite the cellar's dry chill. He opened it with gloved hands. The pages were not paper, nor vellum, but something that shifted under the light, like frozen breath given form. And there, in looping, silver ink script, was the Malfoy oath. "By blood and breath, by root and rhyme, we bind ourselves to the winter court, to offer tribute when the ice stirs beneath the hill, and to stand as wardens against the thaw that would unmake the old world." His stomach dropped. They had forgotten, everyone had. But the court hadn't. A cold draught swirled behind him, though the door above remained closed. The candle stubs along the shelf flickered once, then died, not with smoke, but with a soft hiss, as if snuffed by snow. Footsteps, light as falling crystals, echoed from the corridor above. He snapped the codex shut and climbed the stairs, pulse tight in his throat. The study door creaked open before he reached it. Hermione Granger stood in the doorway, breathless, her coat dusted with fresh snow. Her wand was drawn, her eyes wide. "I felt it," she said, voice low. "The wards around the manor, they just changed, like something ancient waking up." She stepped inside, scanning the room. "Draco, what did you do?" He didn't answer at first. Instead, he pointed to the window. She turned. The frost had formed new words, now glowing faintly blue. "The blood remembers. The debt is shared. The girl of flame and hearth shall stand beside the son of frost, or all shall sleep beneath white." Hermione exhaled sharply. "It knows me." Draco met her gaze. "It knows both of us." Outside, the wind rose into a long, mournful cry. Somewhere beneath Wiltshire, deep in the bedrock where no light reached, something ancient turned in its sleep and began to climb. The ministry's atrium was never quiet, but today it thrummed with a different sort of energy, tense, hushed, like the air before a storm breaks. Hermione Granger stepped through the golden gates, her boots clicking against the polished marble, breath curling in pale wisps before her. She pulled her cloak tighter, frowning. It shouldn't have been cold here, not underground, not in the heart of the ministry, where temperature was regulated by ancient charms and diligent maintenance spells. Yet frost feathered the edges of the fountain of magical brethren, delicate as lace, and the golden statues stood half-veiled in a rhyme only magic could sustain. Wizards hurried past with their collars turned up, and their wands clutched like talismans. One man sneezed, and a small flurry of snowflakes burst from his nostrils before dissipating midair. Hermione paused, brow furrowing. She'd seen reports, of course. Odd weather patterns in Wiltshire, farmers complaining of fields frozen solid in midsummer, owls failing to deliver because of sudden blizzards over the downs. But this was a symptom, not a cause. "Granger," a sharp voice cut through the murmur. Percy Weasley approached, his gait stiff, his usual fastidiousness strained by the cold. His spectacles were fogged, and he kept rubbing them with a handkerchief embroidered with the ministry's seal. "You're to report to the Department of Mysteries. Immediately." She didn't ask why. Percy's tone left no room for questions. "Is it related to the weather anomalies?" He hesitated. "It's worse than anomalies. 3 oars dispatched to the site near Avebury haven't responded in 12 hours. Their last Patronus message said they saw faces in the ice." Hermione's stomach tightened. Faces? Frozen into the ground. Not dead, not alive, just watching. Percy swallowed. They said the trees were whispering in a language no one's heard since the Dark Ages. She followed him through the winding corridors, her mind already racing. The Department of Mysteries loomed ahead, its black door impassive. Inside, the air was colder still. The usual soft glow of the Hall of Prophecies was dimmed, shadows pooling thick in the corners. A group stood near the central chamber, the minister, two unspeakables in charcoal robes, and, to her surprise, Draco Malfoy. He turned as she entered, his pale eyes sharp beneath the arch of a furrowed brow. "Granger, I suppose they've dragged you into this frostbitten circus too. What are you doing here?" she snapped. "Same as you," he said dryly. "My family's name came up in the archives. Apparently the Malfoys once signed something they didn't bother reading, something about seasonal dues and the keeping of the threshold." Hermione looked to the minister. "You're consulting him?" "He's the only one whose bloodline appears in the original covenant," the minister said, voice low. "And yours, Granger. Your research on pre-Hogwarts magical societies, your work with ancient runes, makes you the best equipped to interpret what's happening." One of the unspeakables stepped forward, unrolling a brittle parchment that shimmered with silver ink. This was found sealed beneath a standing stone near the excavation site. It's written in Fey script. Old Fey, the kind that predates the schism of the courts. Hermione leaned in. Her fingers hovered over the script, tracing the curling symbols. "This isn't just a warning," she murmured. "It's a summons. They're calling the old families. The ones who made pacts during the first winter. The one that lasted 100 years. Malfoy's voice was quiet. "And if we don't answer—" The parchment flared, and for a heartbeat the chamber filled with the sound of wind howling across a frozen plain. The single word formed in the air above it, etched in ice: consequences. Hermione met Malfoy's gaze. No longer enemies, perhaps. Not yet allies, but bound now, by duty, by blood, and by the creeping cold that was waking beneath the earth. "We'll have to go to Wiltshire," she said. "Together." He exhaled, a plume of white in the dim light. "Try not to slow me down, Granger." "You first, Malfoy," she replied, stepping past him. "And don't touch anything carved with runes. Last time someone did, it started snowing in July." He muttered something under his breath, probably an insult, but fell into step beside her. Outside, the sky over London had turned the color of tarnished silver, and far to the west, beneath the chalk hills of Wiltshire, something ancient stirred in the dark. Snow fell in silent spirals over the iron gates of Malfoy Manor, each flake catching the pale glow of the rising moon-like shattered crystal. Hermione Granger pulled her cloak tighter, the wool damp against her neck, her breath curling in front of her, in wisps of silver vapor. The gates groaned open without her touch, as if the house itself had been waiting. She stepped forward, boots crunching on frosted gravel, the manor looming ahead, its pale stone veined with frost, ivy brittle as glass. No lights burned in the upper windows, but a single yellow glow pulsed in the east wing, steady as a heartbeat. She knew that room, the old library, where Lucius once kept his darkest tomes, chained beneath glass. The front door opened before she reached it. Draco stood in the threshold, silhouetted by candlelight, still tall and sharp-angled, but softer now, less the boy who sneered in the corridors of Hogwarts, more a man who had learned to carry silence like a second skin. He wore charcoal gray robes, unadorned, his sleeves rolled to the elbows. A book rested under one arm, its cover etched with silver runes that shimmered faintly in the dim. "You're late," he said. His voice was low, measured, not unkind, not kind. "I had to cross the wards on foot," Hermione replied, stepping inside. The warmth of the house wrapped around her like a reluctant embrace. "They rejected my wand signature at first. They know you're not pure blood." She met his gaze. "They let you in just fine." He turned without answering, leading her down the hall. "They let me in because I carry the key, not the blood. There's a difference." The library was unchanged in its austerity. High ceilings, dark wood, shelves rising like ancient trees. But now, papers littered the long table, naps bent at the corners, ink stains blooming like bruises. Charms hung from the rafters, slivers of bone, frozen petals, a single raven feather suspended in a glass jar. The air smelled of frost and old parchment, with a faint undercurrent of something sharper, iron maybe, or blood. Hermione set her satchel down and pulled off her gloves. "You've been here since the ministry contacted you?" "Since the first body was found," he corrected, "in the woods near Avebury." Fingers turned to ice, lips blue, no cause of death, just stillness. She swallowed. "I read the report, and you believed it." "I believed the magic in the soil samples," she said evenly. "The residual enchantments don't match anything in our archives. Not wizard, not centaur, not even ancient druidic. But they resonate with the rhythms of the land, like something waking." Draco walked to the hearth, where a low fire flickered. He tossed a pinch of gray powder into the flames, and they turned momentarily blue. "The Winter Court," he said. "Not myth, not story. They were sealed beneath Wiltshire 2,000 years ago, bound by the first pact. Blood for peace. Always for their sleep." "How do you know this?" Hermione asked, stepping closer. "My mother found the ledger." He gestured to a slim volume on the mantel, bound in pale leather. "It's written in high fae. Took me 3 weeks to translate. The Malfoys were one of the 12 families charged with maintaining the seal. Every generation, a tribute offered beneath the solstice stone. And no one said anything? No one remembered," he said quietly, "until the frost began climbing the standing stones, until the dreams started." She frowned. "Dreams?" He looked away. "I see her. The queen, ice in her hair, voice like wind through bone. She calls my name, says the dead is overdue." Hermione's pulse quickened, and the others, the other families. "Some deny it, some are already gone, vanished, the Parkinsons, the Knots, no bodies, just frost on their thresholds." He turned to face her then, his gray eyes searching hers. "Why did they send you, Granger? Why not Shacklebolt? Why not an Auror?" "Because I'm the only one who studied the old pacts," she said, "and because I believe you." A silence stretched between them, fragile as a frozen stream. Then faintly, a chime, like distant bells beneath the earth. Draco's hand clenched at his side. "They're stirring." Hermione reached into her satchel and pulled out a small carved box of yew wood. "Then we'll wake first." The air tasted of iron and frost that morning, sharp enough to sting the back of Draco Malfoy's throat as he stepped across the cracked flagstones of Malfoy Manor's eastern terrace. The ground beyond the garden had split overnight, a jagged fissure splitting the earth like a wound, its edges glazed with ice that shimmered violet in the weak dawn light. He didn't need to kneel to feel it. The cold didn't just bite, it watched, and from deep within that crevice, something was singing. It wasn't a song in any language he knew. Not Latin, not Parseltongue, not even the clipped elvish chants his mother had once whispered during solstice rites. It was a chorus of voices, too many, too harmonious to be human, rising from the dark like breath from a sleeping beast. The notes hung suspended in the air, vibrating against his bones, making his teeth ache. He wrapped his cloak tighter, but the chill had already seeped beneath his skin. A rustle in the frost-laden yew bushes made him turn, wand drawn in one smooth motion. Hermione Granger stepped out, her boots crunching over a thin crust of ice, her breath pluming like smoke. She wore a thick woolen coat, her hair wild from the wind, and her eyes, wide, wary, locked onto the fissure. "It's spreading," she said, voice low. "The ministry's sensors picked up magical resonance all along the Wiltshire ridge. This isn't localized, and that sound, I hear it," Draco cut in, not taking his eyes off the crack. "It's been singing since 2 hours past midnight. House elves won't go near it. Even the garden ghouls are silent." She took a cautious step forward, pulling a small brass compass from her pocket. Its needle spun wildly, then settled, pointing directly into the fissure. "This isn't just earth splitting, it's a breach. Something's waking up down there." Draco exhaled sharply. The wards on the estate failed at 317, not broken, unraveled. Like they were never there. My father's blood seal, the ancestral protections, gone. As if they remembered, they weren't meant to last. Hermione turned to him, her face pale. "Your family's name is on the old pacts, Draco, the ones no one talks about. the ones from before Hogwarts, before the Statute of Secrecy. I found references in the Black family archives, names like Malfoy, Lestrange, Longbottom, bound by oath to the hallowed courts. Winter's due its tribute. He laughed, but it was hollow. Tribute? Blood? Gold? What do frozen fairies want with wizarding coin? I don't think it's coin, she said softly. I think it's memory, loyalty, obedience. And if we don't answer, it'll take something anyway. The singing shifted then, a single note bending downward, mournful, resonant. The frost along the fissure pulsed, spreading in intricate patterns like lace across the frozen grass. For a moment Draco thought he saw shadows moving beneath the ice, elongated figures with antlered silhouettes and eyes like frozen stars. He took an involuntary step back. You feel it too, Hermione whispered. It knows we're here. Of course it knows, he muttered. This is my land, my blood. This is what Grandfather Abraxas was afraid of, the old magic returning when the world grew cold enough. He used to say the earth remembers its masters. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time he didn't see suspicion in her gaze. He saw understanding, and fear, equal to his own. We can't let it spread, she said. If this reaches the Muggle villages, it'll freeze them where they stand, he finished. Turn their breath to glass. I've read the same histories. The last time the Winter Court walked, 6 parishes vanished, not destroyed, forgotten. As if they never existed, the wind died. The song deepened, weaving into the silence like thread into fabric. From the fissure rose a single tendril of mist, curling upward like a hand reaching from a grave. Hermione reached for his arm. Her touch was warm, startlingly so, against the numbing air. We have to go down there. Draco stared at the crack, at the impossible cold, at the echo of voices that sang of oaths, unkept and winters eternal. He swallowed. Then we go together. The melody came again just after midnight, a thin thread of sound winding through the cold stone corridors of Malfoy Manor, like breath through bone. Hermione paused in the shadow of an arched doorway, one hand braced against the wall, her breath puffing in white clouds. It wasn't like any music she'd ever heard, neither flute nor voice, but something older, colder, as if the air itself were weeping. "Do you hear it?" she whispered. Draco didn't answer at first. He stood a few paces ahead, his pale hair catching the dim light of the floating orb between them. His jaw was tight, eyes fixed on the cracked mosaic beneath their feet. The pattern, long obscured by dust and time, had begun to glow faintly, pulsing in time with the song. "It's beneath us," he said at last. "The old wards, they're unraveling." They had spent weeks piecing together fragments, forgotten scripts in the manor's deepest library, a silver locket buried in the garden that hummed when held to the wind, the way Narcissa's hands trembled whenever she passed the east wing. All of it led here, to a forgotten passage beneath the wine cellar, sealed with runes that predated the Malfoys, runes that now flickered like dying embers. Hermione stepped forward, her fingers brushing the wall. The stone was unnaturally cold, but beneath it she felt a slow, rhythmic thrum, like a heartbeat buried in earth. "We need to open it," she said. Draco turned to her, his gray eyes sharp. "You don't understand what's down there. My grandmother used to say the house was built over something, sleeping, that the Malfoys were the first to live here, just the ones who forgot. We don't have a choice," she said. "The frost reached Oxford yesterday. Mobile trains stalled in ice that won't melt. And the dreams? I know the dreams," he cut in, voice low. "Ice halls. A woman with eyes like frozen stars. She calls my name." Hermione shivered, though not from the cold. She'd dreamed them too, endless corridors of black ice, a throne carved from storm and silence, and a voice that whispered in a language she shouldn't understand, yet did. "You are bound. You will kneel." She reached into her robe and pulled out the shard of mirror they'd found in the garden, the one that showed not her reflection, but a winding staircase descending into dark stone. "It's time," she said. Draco exhaled slowly, then raised his wand. The words he spoke were not in Latin, nor any language Hermione recognized. The syllables curled like smoke, and the wall trembled. Cracks spread across the mosaic, and the air thickened with the scent of snow and iron. The ground split open. A flight of steps spiraled downward, carved from obsidian, veined with silver. The song grew louder, clearer now, a woman's voice, humming a lullaby in a tongue lost to time. The walls shimmered as they descended, revealing murals of tall, pale figures with eyes like moonlight, their hands raised in blessing or curse. Hermione couldn't tell. At the bottom the chamber opened like a cathedral beneath the earth. Ice clung to the vaulted ceiling, glowing faintly blue. In the center stood a dais, and upon it a harp, its frame twisted from frozen roots, its strings made of hair fine as frost. No one played it. Yet the music continued. Draco stepped forward, his boot crunching on a carpet of white petals that hadn't been there a moment before. Roses, frozen mid-blue. "This wasn't here before," he said. Hermione moved to the dais. The harp vibrated beneath her gaze, and when she reached out, the song shifted, a single note bending toward warmth. Then from the shadows beyond the ice, something stirred. A figure emerged, tall, draped in silver silk that moved like water. Her skin was pale as bone, her hair a cascade of black ice, but her eyes dark, deep, ancient, locked onto Hermione with terrifying recognition. "You have her voice," the woman said, and her own was the echo of the first winter, the one who sang the pact. Hermione's breath caught. I don't—" "You will remember," the Fae whispered, "and when you do, you will choose. Blood or breath, winter or fire." Draco stepped between them, wand raised, but the woman only smiled, sad, knowing. "You think you protect her, son of stone and shadow." She tilted her head, "But the song chooses, and it has chosen both." The harp sang louder, and the ice began to climb the walls. The air in the chamber was thick with the scent of frost and old stone, each breath a knife in Draco's lungs. Beneath their feet the floor was no longer marble, but something older, veined with silver threads that pulsed faintly, like veins beneath pale skin. Hermione's fingers brushed the nearest wall, her touch cautious, almost reverent. The carvings ran deep, etched in no language. Draco recognized, yet the names, those he knew. "Malfoy," she whispered, tracing the deep groove with her index finger. "It's here, at the center." He stepped closer, his boots crunching on a thin layer of ice that hadn't been there moments before. The name stood out, stark and undeniable, carved within a spiral of thorns and silver frost. Around it, others blamed like cursed flowers. Black, Lestrange, Knot, Rosier. Names from his childhood, from dinner tables where loyalty and blood were spoken of like currency. But interwoven among them were names he didn't expect. Weasley, Longbottom, even Granger. Hermione had gone very still. Her breath fobbed the air in short, uneven bursts. "That can't be right," she murmured. "My family, we're not pure blood." "Apparently, the Fae don't care about ministry classifications," Draco said, voice low. The cold was seeping into his bones, but it was the weight of the carvings that chilled him more. "They see lineage, something deeper." She turned to him, eyes wide and dark in the dim light. "You think they can trace ancestry back before the statute of secrecy, before recorded magical genealogies?" "Possibly further," he said, gaze drifting to the base of the carving, where a series of symbols spiraled downward like roots. "Before magic split, before wizards called themselves something separate." A silence stretched between them, brittle as ice. The chamber seemed to listen. Hermione exhaled slowly. "This isn't just about tribute, is it? It's about obligation. Blood debt." Draco crossed his arms, jaw tight. "My grandmother once told me stories, whispers really, about ancestors who made pacts during the long winter. She said the Malfoys were given power in exchange for service. At the time I thought it was just old woman's fancy. Now it's carved in stone," she finished. A gust of wind impossibly howled through the sealed chamber. The silver veins in the floor flared, and for a heartbeat the names burned with pale blue fire. Draco stepped back instinctively, but Hermione stood her ground, eyes scanning the carvings. "There's a pattern," she said. "Look, the families aren't listed randomly. They're grouped by season: Malfoy, Black, Winter; Weasley, Lovegood, Diggory, Spring. The Grangers are under Autumn. But why?" Draco frowned. "Seasonal courts. That's how the Fae organize themselves. The Winter Court has awakened. The others, dormant maybe. But if winter is claiming its due, The others might follow. Her fingers trembled as she hovered over her family's name. Then we're not just negotiating with them, we're answering a summons. A low hum filled the chamber, vibrating through the stone. From the far wall, a new section of the carving began to glow, words forming as if being written in real time. Hermione squinted. "It's a rite," she said. "A ritual of reaffirmation. Every 7 generations, the bound must offer tribute. Something of value, something personal. A lock of hair, a drop of blood, a memory." Draco's throat tightened. "And if they don't?" The hum deepened. The temperature dropped sharply. Frost crept up the walls, swallowing the carvings in white. "Then the dead is collected by force," she whispered, "and the land freezes over." He looked at her then, not as an enemy, not as a mudblood, not as the woman who'd bested him in every class, but as someone standing at the edge of the same abyss. Her cheeks were flushed from cold, her breath unsteady, but her eyes were alight with resolve. "So we find a way to pay it," he said. "Without giving them our souls," she nodded once. Together, the carvings pulsed again, softer this time, as if the chamber had heard, and judged them worthy, for now. A wind that carried no scent of earth or rain swept through the ministry atrium, though the great bronze doors remained closed. It curled around the fountain, now a cracked and silent monument to a peace long fraying, and sent scrolls skittering across the marble like frightened birds. Hermione Granger looked up from the parchment she had been studying, her fingers instinctively tightening around her wand. The air thickened, crystallizing at the edges, frost blooming across the floor in fractal patterns that pulsed with a cold blue light. Then the figure formed. It stepped forward from nothing, a silhouette woven of ice and shadow, its long cloak trailing like frozen mist. Its face was neither man nor woman, but sharp and ageless, carved with the precision of glaciers. Eyes like chips of winter moonlight fixed on the gathering of ministry officials, who had begun to murmur in alarm. No one moved, no one breathed. "I am the voice of the Frost Court," the figure said, and its voice was not a sound but a vibration in the bones, a hum beneath the skin. "I speak for the winter, that sleeps no more." Hermione felt the words in her teeth. Beside her, Draco Malfoy stiffened, his hand slipping into the inner pocket of his coat. She glanced at him. His jaw was clenched, his skin pale, but his eyes were steady. He had received the same summons she had, though from different bloodlines. The Malfoys, once proud in their pure-blood lineage, and the Grangers, whose ancestry held secrets even Hermione had yet to uncover. "You stand upon ancient ground," the envoy continued. "Your streets tread upon our halls. Your magic leaks from our bindings. The pact is broken, the debt unpaid." Kingsley Shacklebolt stepped forward, tall and composed, though frost already silvered the edges of his robes. "We were unaware of any pact. If there was an agreement, it was made before our time, before memory." The Fae's head tilted, a gesture both curious and terrible. "Ignorance is no shield. Blood remembers. The heirs must answer." A gust of wind, sharp as shattered glass, tore through the hall. From the marble floor, a sigil bloomed, twisting lines of ice that spiraled outward, forming a seal Hermione recognized from a crumbling tome in the restricted section. The mark of the Winter Oath. She had seen it in a dream the night before, though she hadn't known its meaning then. 2 names rose from the sigil, in letters of frozen breath. "Malfoy. Granger." Gasps echoed. Draco exhaled sharply. "That's impossible. My family's records are incomplete," the envoy said. "The Malfoys swore fealty when the first frost touched their manor's stones. The Grangers. You forget your mother's mother, do you not? The woman who vanished into the snow and never returned." Hermione froze. Her grandmother. A mystery her parents had never spoken of, only whispered about on winter nights. "A woman from the north," they'd said. "A quiet soul, cold hands." "You are bound," the Fae said. "The tribute is due. One heir must walk the path of ice. One must offer memory, breath, and blood to the throne beneath the Wiltshire hills, or the frost will take all." "No," Hermione said, stepping forward before she could stop herself. "There has to be another way, a negotiation." A renewal of terms. The Fae turned its gaze on her, and for a moment she felt the weight of centuries pressing down, the silence of buried halls, the slow turning of stars above frozen towers. Then a flicker, something softer, like a memory catching fire. "You speak with the voice of the old ones," it murmured. "You remember, even if you do not know." Draco moved beside her, his voice low but clear. "We'll speak with your court, face to face, not through shadows and riddles." The envoy studied them both, then bowed, just slightly. "So be it. On the night of the longest dark, at the standing stone where the veil is thin, you will come, alone, and you will bring the truth of your blood." It began to fade, dissolving into mist and ice crystals that scattered like ash. "One more thing," Hermione called. "What happens if we don't come?" The voice returned from everywhere and nowhere. "Then winter will not end, and your world will forget the sun." Snow fell in silent layers over the Malfoy estate, dusting the skeletal hedges and silvering the frozen fountain at the center of the courtyard. Inside the long hall the air was thick with tension and the faint, unsettling scent of frostbitten earth. The Weisengummet had not been summoned, not officially, but the heads of the old families had come anyway, drawn by ancestral magic that tugged at their blood like a cold finger beneath the skin. Draco stood near the hearth, arms crossed, watching the fire sputter as if reluctant to burn. Every few seconds a thin rime of ice crept across the stone mantle, only to vanish when someone stepped too close. The hearth wasn't safe. Nothing in this room was. "They're not bargaining," said Hermione, her voice low, but carrying across the murmuring crowd. She stood beside him, pale but resolute, her fingers pressed to the spine of a crumbling grimoire she'd pulled from the Malfoy library. The pact wasn't a negotiation, it was a surrender. Our ancestors gave them land, magic, and tribute, in exchange for staying beneath the earth. And now the debt is due. A sharp laugh cut through the murmurs. Lord Greengrass rose from his chair, his robes shimmering with protective enchantments. "You expect us to believe in fairy tales, Granger? That some frostbitten court buried in Wiltshire can demand our obedience? This is absurd." "It's not a fairy tale," Draco said, turning. "You felt the summons. Your ring burned, same as mine, same as everyone's." He held up his hand, reviewing the Malfoy signet, its emerald now threaded with veins of frost. "They're awake and they remember every name." "The Ministry will handle it," sneered Rosier, one of the younger pure-blood heirs, his breath misting in the unnatural cold. "We don't bow to creatures of myth." Hermione stepped forward, her voice sharpening. "The Ministry is blind. They've already sent Aurors into the valley near Stone Hollow, and none have returned. The land itself rejects them. Their spells unravel in the air like thread pulled from cloth." Silence followed. Then, a dry whisper. "Sacrifice." All eyes turned to Lady Flint, ancient and draped in black lace, her eyes milky with age, but burning with knowledge. "Our ancestors gave them blood, a life once every century to keep the pact sealed. It's time." Draco's stomach twisted. "You're suggesting we kill one of our own?" "A volunteer," she corrected, "would suffice. Or a criminal. It matters not to them, so long as the offering is pure of old lineage." "This is barbaric," Hermione snapped. "We're not offering anyone to some winter god." "And what would you have us do?" Greengrass demanded. "Freeze to death while you search for a better solution. The rivers are already solid by dawn. Crops wither in the fields. Children whisper to shadows that answer back. A wind stirred, though no window was open. The flames in the hearth bowed sideways, then died completely, plunging the hall into dimness lit only by wandlight and the faint blue glow emanating from the floorboards. Beneath their feet something pulsed, slow, rhythmic, like a heart buried deep in the earth. Draco felt it in his bones. The court was listening. Hermione met his gaze, her expression unreadable but firm. "There's another way. The pact can be renegotiated. The Fae respect oaths, but they also honor courage. If we go to them, not as subjects, but as equals." "Foolishness," Rosier spat. "They'll freeze your heart before you take 10 steps into their domain." "Then let her try," Draco said, louder now. All heads turned. He hadn't meant to speak, but the words had clawed their way out. "Let her go with me. If we fail, then you can start drawing lots for who dies first." Hermione looked at him, surprise flickering in her eyes. "You'd stand with me," he exhaled, watching his breath curl into the cold. "I'd rather die bargaining than kneel." No one spoke. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, and far below in the deep stone chambers beneath Wiltshire, something ancient shifted in its sleep. The air in the Wizengamot chamber had grown thick with the scent of cold stone and older magic, the kind that clung to ancient oaths and whispered through bloodlines. Candles flickered low, their light shuddering, as if afraid to burn too bright. Hermione stood at the center of the semicircle, robes pulled tight around her, breathe visible in the unnatural chill that had seeped into the ministry's underbelly. Around her, the council members, ministers, elders, heads of old families, watched with varying degrees of dread and disdain. "We have no precedent for negotiation with a Fey court," said Minister Thorne, his voice brittle. "Only survival, and survival, Miss Granger, demands sacrifice. The pact was clear. When the frost returns, the blood must answer." "The pact was made in fear," Hermione shot back, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Signed by men who barely understood what they were binding, under threat of winter that never ended. But we are not those men. We have knowledge, history, diplomacy, tools beyond bloodletting." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Lucius Malfoy sat to the left, pale and silent, fingers curled around the hen of his cane like a man clinging to a raft. His son stood near the archway, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Draco had not spoken since they'd entered, but his presence was a weight, sharp, watchful. "Diplomacy?" sneered Madame Greengrass. "You think the Winter Court wants treaties. They want tribute. They want balance. And if we do not give it willingly, they will take it by force. Through frostbite and famine, through children who do not wake in the morning. And if we offer blood, what then?" Hermione turned, scanning their faces. "One life. 3. Will that sate them? Or will they return every generation skimming our kin like cattle at a gate? Is that what wizarding strength has come to? To cowering before the dark with a knife and a prayer?" Silence. She stepped forward, voice softening. "I've read the fragments, the grimoires buried beneath Malfoy vaults, the runes carved into the stones beneath Avebury. The Winter Court does not hunger for death. It hungers for acknowledgement, for the return of what was broken. They were cast down, sealed beneath the earth, not by magic greater than theirs, but by betrayal. And now they've woken, not to destroy, but to reclaim." "That's romantic folly," Thorne snapped. "They've already frozen 12 villages. Muggles, Hermione. Muggles who do not wake, whose breath crystallizes in their lungs. This isn't about pride. It's about survival." "And what is survival?" Hermione asked quietly. "If we'd become the very monsters we fear." Draco finally moved, stepping into the light. "She's not wrong." All eyes turned to him. He met his father's gaze, then the minister's unflinching. "The Winter Queen does not speak in riddles for sport. When she demanded tribute, she named no method, only that the debt be paid. My family's records, our records, speak of balance, not slaughter, of offerings made in kind, art, memory, magic willingly given." Hermione looked at him, surprised. He gave the barest nod. "She'll accept a binding of will," he said. "A magical oath, sworn not in blood, but in purpose. A promise that the old pacts are honored, not by death, but by remembrance, by keeping their names alive in our histories, by allowing their magic to coexist." "And what if she refuses?" someone asked. "Then we face winter," Hermione said. "But we face it as people who still believe in choice, in mercy, in the possibility of peace." She turned back to the council. "We are not powerless, but power without principle is just another kind of winter. Let us go to them, not with a corpse, but with a voice. Let us speak. Let us listen. And let us prove that warmth still lives in us, before it's buried beneath ice." Snow fell in silent flurries over the Malfoy library, each flake catching the weak winter light before dissolving against the frost-laced windows. Inside, the air held the scent of old parchment and ironwood shelves, thick with centuries of silence. Draco stood in the center of the room, a brittle scroll trembling between his fingers. The ink was silver, not black, and it shifted slightly when he tilted the page, as if alive. It had taken him 3 days to find it, buried beneath a false paddle in the ancestral records, sealed with a charm only a Malfoy's blood could break. He had cut his palm without hesitation. The wound still stung. The words on the scroll were archaic, written in a dialect of old High Fae that Hermione had only half-translated before the winter court's frost cracked the wards at Hogwarts. But Draco didn't need translation to understand the name at the bottom. Abraxas Malfoy, first of the line, bound in ice and honor, his great-great-grandfather. The fire in the hearth flickered low, casting long shadows across the marble floor. Draco read the passage again, slowly, forcing his breath to steady. In the year of the long winter, when the sun fled and the earth slept beneath white shrouds, Abraxas Malfoy knelt before the Queen of Thorns and offered his blood, his name, and the unborn names of his line. In exchange, the winter court spared his house from the blight that withers noble magic. So long as winter returns, so shall the Malfoy name endure. Draco exhaled sharply. His fingers tightened on the scroll. It wasn't protection from war or betrayal. It was survival. The Malfoys hadn't just made a pact. They had bargained their legacy for life itself. And now, centuries later, the court had returned to collect. A draft whispered through the room, though no window was open. The temperature dropped in an instant. Frost bloomed across the bookshelves, delicate and cruel, creeping like veins across the spines of ancient tomes. Draco turned sharply, heart-pounding. At the edge of the shadows, a figure stood, tall, pale, wrapped in a cloak of raven feathers and ice. Her eyes were silver, depthless, reflecting no light. "You have read what was sealed," she said, her voice like wind through frozen branches. "Now you know why your blood calls to us." Draco didn't step back. "I know my ancestor made a deal to save his family. I don't know why that matters now." The Fey Queen tilted her head. "Matters? The pact was never fulfilled. He gave tribute for one generation. Then the wizarding world forgot. Your kind buried the truth, called us myth. But oaths made in winter do not die with spring." She stepped forward, and the frost followed. "We do not wish war, Draco Malfoy. We wish what was promised. Tribute, recognition, a seat at the table you stole from us. And if I refuse, then the contract reverts to its oldest clause." Her smile was thin. "The line that broke the pact shall be unmade. From you, to your child, to every name that follows." The words struck like a curse. Draco's breath caught. He thought of his mother, of the fragile peace they had built after the war, of the quiet life he had begun to imagine, something small, something safe. It was Hermione who had first sensed the imbalance, the way magic had begun to stutter in the cold, how the patronuses of the Ministry guards flickered and died in the presence of certain winds. She had come to him, not as an enemy, but as someone who understood that history was never truly buried. Now, standing in the icy silence of his family's library, Draco realized she had been right. He looked back at the Queen. "If I honor the pact, what do you want?" "A token of loyalty, a ritual of renewal. Not blood alone, but choice. You must stand before the court and speak your ancestors' vow, not as compulsion but as will. And if I do, then the Malfoy line endures, and Britain may yet see spring." Draco closed his eyes. Outside, the wind howled. Somewhere beyond the manor's edges, Hermione was tracing the old ley lines, searching for a way to balance the scales without surrender. But perhaps balance required sacrifice. "I'll do it," he said, "but on one condition." The Queen paused. "Speak. You leave the innocent untouched. No more children frozen in their beds. No more villages lost to snow that never melts." A long silence, then a nod. "So be it. Choose wisely, Draco Malfoy. For the next snowfall, the court will be waiting." The air grew sharp the moment they crossed the boundary, a blade of cold slicing through cloaks and breath alike. Hermione pulled her scarf tighter, fingers stiffening around the handle of her wand. Before them, the earth had split open days prior, a fissure in the chalk downs of Wiltshire, exhaling mist that smelled of frost and something older, like petrichor from a world before man. Ice coated the jagged walls, not clear like winter glaze, but opalescent, threaded with veins of silver that pulsed faintly, as if the stone itself were dreaming. Draco walked ahead, his posture rigid, breath curling in white plumes. He didn't look back, but she knew he felt it too, the weight of the place, the way sound died inches from the lips. Even their footsteps, muffled by layers of frost, seemed swallowed whole by the silence. "Do you see that?" Hermione whispered, her voice barely carrying. Draco paused, turning just enough for the light of his wand to catch the curve of his cheek. "See what?" "There," she said, pointing. A shaperd shimmered in the ice, faint like a memory trapped beneath glass. A figure, tall and slender, arms outstretched, eyes closed. Not a statue, not quite real. There in the walls. He stepped closer, wary. Trapped. No, waiting. A gust of wind howled through the tunnel, though there was no source, no opening above. The silver veins in the ice brightened, then dimmed. Like a slow heartbeat, Hermione shivered, not just from cold, but from the press of something vast and watchful, ancient. This was no mere cave system. It was a throat, drawing them deeper. "We shouldn't have come alone," Draco muttered, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. "You said your family's wards wouldn't hold much longer," she reminded him. "And the Ministry still thinks this is a weather anomaly. Who else would believe us?" He didn't answer. They both knew the truth. The old pacts were real, written in blood and woomite, sealed before Hogwarts was stone. The Malfoys had served as intermediaries once, centuries ago. Now the debt had come due. They pressed on. The tunnels sloped downward, the ice growing thicker, more deliberate. Arches formed where none had been carved, spiraling into vaulted ceilings hung with chandeliers of frozen crystal. Each one held a light, ale blue, like distant stars. The air hummed, low and resonant, like a psalm heard through water. Hermione reached out, brushing a hand against the wall. The ice was not slick, but warm in places, too warm, and beneath her palm, the trapped figure flickered, lips parting as if to speak. She snatched her hand back. "That's not possible," she breathed. "That's organic, like it's alive." Draco's wand trembled slightly. "They're not trapped, they're preserving themselves. Sleeping until the pact was called, and we're the ones who woke them." A noise echoed ahead, not a sound, but a sensation, a vibration in the bone, then a voice, genderless and layered, speaking in a language that slivered through thought like frost over glass, the last of the oath-bound, and the blood unbroken. Hermione's breath caught. "It knows us." Draco stepped in front of her, wand raised. "We're here to parley, not to fight." Silence. Then the ice ahead cracked, not with violence, but like a flower opening. A path revealed itself, descending into a cavern so vast, the light could not reach its ceiling. In the center stood a throne of black ice, wreathed in storm, and upon it something that was not quite fey, not quite human, but older than both. Its eyes opened, and the cold became a living thing. The air inside the buried chamber was too still, too cold, as if breath itself had been forbidden for centuries. Hermione's wand trembled in her grip, its feeble lumos casting long, wavering shadows across the frost-rimmed stone. Around them the walls pulsed faintly with an icy blue light, veins of ancient magic threading through the rock like frozen rivers. She took a slow step forward, her boots crunching on a dusting of rime that hadn't been there a moment before. Draco stayed close behind, his breath shallow, his gray eyes scanning the arches that spiraled down into the dark. "This place," he murmured. "It's not on any map, not even in the Malfoy grimoires." "It wasn't meant to be," Hermione replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "It remembers something older than records." A gust of wind rushed through the chamber, though there was no door, no opening. The torches, long extinguished, their iron sconces black with age, flickered to life with pale blue flames. And then figures began to form from the mist. They emerged like memories, given breath, tall, elegant, draped in silks and furs that shimmered with frost. Their faces were noble, proud, but hollow, eyes glassy with sorrow, mouths parted in silent pleas. They moved in slow procession, gliding across the floor without sound, their feet never quite touching the stone. Hermione froze. "They're not real," she whispered. "Not anymore." "No," Draco said, his voice tight, "but they're not gone either." One of the figures turned, a woman in a gown of silver white, her hair coiled like frozen vines. Her gaze settled on Draco, and she lifted a hand, translucent fingers trembling. He flinched but didn't look away. "You bear the mark," she said, her voice echoing from everywhere and nowhere. "The blood remembers. The pact demands." "What pact?" Hermione demanded, stepping forward, despite the chill that clawed at her skin. "Who are you?" The woman didn't answer her. Instead, she drifted closer to Draco, her spectral hand hovering just above his forearm where the dark mark had once been. "You broke one chain," she whispered, "but another waits in the roots of the world." Draco swallowed hard. "I didn't ask for any of this." "No," another voice said, "a man and a crown of antlers and ice. But your ancestors did. They knelt, they offered blood, loyalty, firstborns in winter's name. And when they tried to forget, the court preserved them, like moths in amber." Hermione's breath caught. "You're tracked. You've been here since the pact was broken," the woman finished. "And the court does not forgive, it only remembers." More figures appeared now, children with frost in their hair, knights with swords of ice, their forms flickering like candlelight. Each bore the mark of their house, crests stitched into their garments, rings on their fingers. Malfoy, Greengrass, Not, even names lost to modern wizarding history. They were nobility, Hermione realized. The old families, the ones who ruled before Hogwarts, before the Ministry. Draco's jaw tightened, and now were expected to pick up where they left off. A cold wind spiraled through the chamber, and the illusions began to wail, softly at first, then in rising chorus. It was not a sound of rage, but of grief, of centuries spent in silent servitude, their souls bound to a court that no longer walked the world, yet was waking. Suddenly, the woman reached out and touched Draco's cheek. He gasped. Her fingers were not solid, but the cold burned like fire. Images flooded his mind. A grand hall of ice, thrones carved from glaciers, a queen with eyes like frozen stars, and beneath it all, a heartbeat, slow, ancient, terrible. "The queen dreams," the woman whispered, "and when she wakes, she will claim what was promised, not gold, not land, blood, obedience, souls." Hermione grabbed Draco's arm, pulling him back. The vision shattered. The figures began to fade, their forms dissolving into mist, their final cries trailing into silence. Draco staggered, his face pale. "They weren't just servants," he said, voice raw. "They were sacrifices." Hermione nodded, her heart aching. "And if we don't find a way to break the pact, we'll join them." The air grew sharper with every step, cutting through their cloaks like glass needles. Hermione pulled her scarf higher, her breath pluming in ragged bursts that froze instantly on the fabric. Beside her, Draco moved with a stiff-backed wariness, his hand never far from his wand. The tunnel had narrowed, then widened without warning, spilling them into a space so vast it defied breath. Before them rose a cathedral of ice. It soared upward in silent crystalline spires, arches ribbed like the bones of some ancient leviathan. The walls were not built, they were grown, shaped from glacial blue ice that pulsed with a light, not quite their own. Above, the ceiling arched into darkness, but scattered through it, like trapped constellations, were shards of starlight, suspended in frozen air. They glimmered with a silver-cold brilliance, casting long, shifting shadows that seemed to shift when unobserved. Hermione took a hesitant step forward, her boot crunching on a carpet of frost-dusted stone. "This isn't possible," she whispered. "No magic I've read about could sustain this, not for centuries." Draco didn't answer at first. He stood frozen, not from cold, but from recognition. His fingers brushed the hilt of the dagger at his belt, a family heirloom edged with runes older than Hogwarts. "My great-grandmother," he said, voice low. "She used to speak of a court beneath the frost. Said the Malfoys once offered silver and silence every winter solstice, and that we stopped when magic became loud, when we forgot how to listen." Hermione turned to him, eyes wide. "You never mentioned that." "I didn't believe it," he admitted, jaw tight. "Thought it was just another one of those mad poetic ramblings. Pure bloods tell children to make us feel ancient. Look around, Granger. This is real, and it remembers us." A wind stirred, though there was no source, no opening, no draft. The starlight above flickered, and from deep within the cathedral, a chime rang out, clear and sorrowful, like a bell submerged in snow, The sound vibrated in their teeth. Then shapes emerged. Not from doors. There were no doors, but from the ice itself. Figures stepped forward as though melting from the walls, tall and slender, draped in gowns and cloaks of frozen lace and shadow. Their skin was pale as moonlight on snow, their eyes like chips of glacial stone. Antlers curled from the temples of some. Others bore crowns of frost-bloomed thorns. At their center walked a woman. She glided rather than walked, her bare feet leaving no mark on the frozen floor. Her hair streamed behind her like smoke caught in ice, and her gown shifted with the light, now silver, now deep violet, like the sky before dawn. In her hand she carried a staff of blackened ice, crowned with a single flickering star. Draco stepped in front of Hermione without thinking. "We come under truce," he said, voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "By blood and old words we ask audience." The woman halted. Her gaze, ancient and weightless, settled on Draco first, then on Hermione. When she spoke, her voice was the crack of ice on a frozen lake, beautiful and terrible. "You are late," she said. "The pact was winter. You brought summer instead, and now the balance breaks." Hermione swallowed. "We didn't know. You forgot," the Fey Queen corrected. "And forgetting is a kind of betrayal." Silence stretched, brittle as frost. Then softly Hermione said, "But we're here now, and we're listening." The Queen tilted her head. A single snowflake spiraled down from the unseen sky, and landed in Hermione's palm, and did not melt. The air in the cavernous hole was so cold it burned with every breath, a crystalline ache that settled deep in Hermione's bones. The walls shimmered with ice that looked almost alive, veins of silver light pulsing beneath its surface, like frozen rivers dreaming of flow. At the far end of the hall, upon a throne carved from a single block of black glacial stone, sat the Winter Queen. She was not what Hermione had expected. Beauty, yes, terrible and perfect as a shard of winter dawn. Her hair fell like spun frost over shoulders, draped in a gown of layered ice and shadow, shifting with each subtle movement as though woven from the night sky itself. Her eyes pale, depthless, the color of winter mist, over a frozen lake, fixed on them the moment they stepped across the threshold. But it wasn't her beauty that silenced the breath in Hermione's lungs. It was the stillness, not absence of motion, but a presence so complete, so absolute, that the world seemed to hush in reverence. Draco walked beside her, his posture rigid, jaw clenched tight enough to crack stone. She could feel the tension in him, a coiled readiness beneath the Malfoy composure. He had insisted on coming forward first, citing bloodline precedents, but she saw the flicker in his eyes, the same awe, the same fear, when the Queen's gaze settled upon him. "You come," the Queen said, her voice like wind through frozen branches, soft yet carrying through the hall as if spoken directly into their minds. "Not all do. Some hide, some forget, some believe their magic protects them from ancient debts." Draco bowed, low and precise. "We do not forget, Your Grace. The Malfoy line honors its oaths." "And you?" Her eyes slid to Hermione, and the temperature seemed to drop further. "Granger. No, noble blood, no winter pact. Yet here you stand, breathing in the heart of my court. Why?" Hermione swallowed. Her fingers trembled slightly at her sides, but she lifted her chin. "Because someone has to speak when fear silences the rest. Because the old magic is waking, and no one else seems to understand what that means." A pause. The Queen tilted her head, a gesture so subtle it might have been imagined, spoken like one who thinks words can stop a blizzard. "They can," Hermione said, "if they're the right ones." The Queen smiled then, just the faintest curve of lips, sharp as a blade's edge. "I have not been amused in centuries." Draco shifted beside her. "Your Grace, we did not come to amuse. We came to negotiate. The frost reaches farther each night. Crops fail. Children fall ill with cold that should not exist in May. If the pact demands tribute, name it. Let us offer it, and spare the innocent." The Queen rose. She did not walk. She drifted forward, bare feet soundless on the ice, her gown trailing frost like breath on glass. The air thickened around her, pressing down with invisible weight. "You speak of sparing," she murmured, stopping mere feet away. "But you do not understand. The pact is not transaction. It is balance. Your world has grown loud, messy, warm, too warm. Magic has been bled dry by progress, by engines and wands that answer only to greed. The cold remembers what warmth forgets. Stillness, silence, truth. Hermione's breath came in white puffs. And if we refuse? The Queen's eyes narrowed, just slightly, and the ice beneath their feet groaned. A crack spider-webbed outward from her feet, thin and dark as a vein. "You do not refuse," she said softly. "You endure, or you freeze. But you cert." She reached out, a single finger brushing the air near Hermione's cheek. "You burn so brightly. Curious, dangerous, like a candle in a storm." Draco stepped forward, blocking her. "She speaks for both of us." The Queen studied him then, with new interest. "Malfoy, once your ancestors knelt in snow for a week to prove their loyalty. Now you shield a Muggle born with your body. How the bloodlines have changed." He didn't flinch. "We adapt. That's what survives." A long silence. Then the Queen turned, gliding back toward her throne. "Survival," she mused, "is not the same as endurance." She sat. "Leave me. Return at moonrise. Bring an offering, not of gold, not of blood, but of memory. A memory true, and cold and unbroken. If you bring it, I may listen." The ice doors behind them opened on their own. Hermione exhaled, her legs weak. "That was not what I expected." Draco didn't look at her. "Nothing here is." And as they walked back through the frozen hall, the walls whispering with voices too old to understand, Hermione felt it. The first fragile thread of something new, not just between them, but between worlds. And somewhere beneath the ice, the old magic stirred, listening. The air in the hidden chamber beneath Wiltshire tasted of iron and frost, each breath a sharp sting in Hermione's lungs. The walls, carved from ancient stone veined with glowing blue lichen, pulsed faintly, as though the earth itself were breathing. Before them stood the winter court, not in full glory, not yet, but enough to make the torchlight flicker, and the shadows kneel. Queen Mab loomed at the center, her silver hair coiled like frozen smoke, eyes twin voids rimmed with ice. Her gown was woven from night and snowfall, shifting with every subtle movement, and the silence she carried was heavier than stone. Draco stood rigid beside Hermione, his wand clutched so tightly, his knuckles gleamed white. She could feel the tension coiled in his arm, the barely restrained instinct to draw back, to flee. But he didn't, not yet. "You are the inheritors," Mab intoned, her voice like wind through bare branches. "Blood of the old lines. The pact demands tribute. A vial of blood from each, pure, unspoiled, willingly given." Hermione swallowed. The vial they'd brought, glass-edged with runes, sat cold in her palm. Draco had already offered his, a single drop drawn from his fingertip with a silver ping, his face pale but composed. It had taken everything in her not to flinch when the Fey priestess had pressed the ping to his skin, not from fear, but from the terrible understanding that this was real. Older than Hogwarts, older than Merlin, older than reason itself. Now it was her turn. She stepped forward, but did not extend the vial. "I cannot give you blood," she said, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her chest. "Not as tribute." A ripple passed through the Fey host. One of the courtiers, a tall figure with antlers sprouting from his temples, let out a low hiss. Mab did not move, but the temperature dropped. Frost crept across the floor toward Hermione's boots. "You deny the pact?" the Queen asked, quiet as a snowfall. "I deny the form," Hermione corrected. "The pact was never meant to drain the living. It was a balance, a covenant. Your magic wanes because the world has forgotten, because we've walled ourselves behind wards and logic, pretending the old things don't exist. But I can help. I can restore the link." Silence. Draco turned to her, eyes wide. "Hermione." She didn't look at him. She kept her gaze on Mab. "I've studied the wards beneath Stonehenge, the ley lines beneath the Highlands, the echo magic in the standing stones of Cornwall. The ties are frayed, not broken. With the right ritual, blood isn't needed. Intent is. Memory. Acknowledgement. If you allow me, I can weave a new tether using resonance and remembrance, not sacrifice." Mab tilted her head, a predator considering prey that had just spoken back. "You would bargain with a queen. I would honor what was broken," Hermione said. "You're fading because we stopped believing. But belief isn't gone. It's buried. Then I can dig it up. The queen stepped forward. One gloved hand lifted. Ice spiraled in the air between them, forming delicate chains that dissolved before they could bind. And if you fail, then I offer my blood. Freely, then. Draco sucked in a breath. That wasn't the plan. It is now, she whispered. Mab studied her. And for a heartbeat, the chamber seemed to hold its breath. Then the ghost of a smile, cold, but not cruel, touched the queen's lips. You are not what I expected, daughter of mortals. Very well, you have 3 nights. Should the link hold at dawn on the 3rd day, the tribute is stayed. Should it fail? She didn't finish. She didn't need to. As they turned to leave, the stone groaning behind them, Draco caught her wrist. You're mad, he said, voice low. Completely mad. Hermione exhaled, her breath a white plume in the dark. Maybe, but it's warmer than blood, isn't it? And for the first time since the frost had come, he almost smiled. Snow sifted through the air like ash, drifting in slow spirals over the frozen glade. The trees stood sentinel, their branches blackened with rime, and between them, the breath of living things hung visible and trembling. Hermione exhaled, watching the cloud of warmth dissolve into the cold. Beside her, Draco shifted, his cloak pulled tight around his shoulders. Neither spoke. They had been warned. No lies, no omissions, no half-truths. Not for a day, not if they wished to leave the Winter Court alive. The queen's voice had been soft, almost kind, when she'd spoken the terms. Speak only what is true, and you may yet walk away. Lie, even to spare yourselves, and the frost will claim you where you stand. Hermione tightened her grip on her wand, though she knew it would do little against magic older than Hogwarts. I don't like this, she said, the words escaping before she could stop them. Draco turned to her, his gray eyes sharp. You don't like half the things we've seen since we stepped into this cursed wood, Granger, but here we are. She flinched. Don't call me that. Call you what? Granger? That's your name, isn't it? It's Hermione, or have you forgotten how to be civil when it isn't convenient? He looked away, jaw clenched. I haven't forgotten. I just don't know why you'd want me to use it. Because we're not children anymore, she said quietly. And if we're going to survive this, we need to stop pretending we're still at war. A silence settled between them, brittle as ice. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and something older, like buried silver and frozen roses. I suppose you're right, Draco admitted. I don't like it, but you're right. She glanced at him, surprised. You never used to admit that. I never used to have a choice, he said, voice low. Back then, pride was all I had. Now it feels like a weight I can't carry. Hermione studied him, the shadow beneath his eyes, the way his fingers trembled slightly at his side. She had seen him angry, arrogant, even scared, but never this, never vulnerable. I think, she began carefully, that I've misjudged you. Not entirely. Some of it was true, but not all. He gave a dry laugh. High praise from you. It's not meant to be praise, it's meant to be true. He looked at her then, really looked, and something shifted in the space between them. You were never just a know-it-all to me, you know. Not even at the start. She blinked. Then what was I? A threat, he said. To everything I'd been taught. You were smart and brave, and you didn't care about blood. And that frightened me. Hermione felt her breath catch. I didn't know. No, you wouldn't have. You saw the mask, not the boy behind it. They walked on, the snow crunching beneath their boots. A raven called from above, its cry echoing like a cracked bell. I hated you once, she said. Truly, after the things you said, about my blood. I know, he interrupted, voice rough. And I meant them, at the time, but not because I believed in purity. Because I was afraid. Afraid that if I didn't say them, my father would find someone else to replace me. She stopped walking. You were protecting yourself. I was a coward, he corrected. But yes, that's what I was doing. The truth hung between them, raw and unvarnished. Hermione felt it like a wound, exposed, stinging, but somehow clean. I've thought about apologizing, he added, almost too quiet to hear. For years, but I never knew how. She reached out then and touched his arm, just for a moment. Saying it now is enough. He didn't pull away. The wind stilled. The trees seemed to lean in, listening. And for the first time, beneath the weight of truth and winter, something fragile, Something warm began to grow. The air in the hidden chamber beneath Wiltshire was thin and sharp, each breath a ribbon of frost unraveling in their lungs. The walls pulsed with a pale blue light, veins of ancient magic threading through the stone like frozen rivers waking from slumber. Draco stood with his back against the archway, his breath shallow, his fingers clenched around the silver-handled dagger they'd found buried beneath the roots of a dead yew. Hermione knelt at the center of the sigil, her palms pressed flat against the icy floor, whispering counter-charms that cracked and splintered like ice under foot. "It's not holding," she murmured, voice trembling. "The binding, it's rewriting itself." "We're too late." "We're not," Draco said, though the certainty in his voice felt brittle. He stepped forward, the hem of his coat catching on frost-laced stones. "There's another way. The spell, it isn't just a lock, it's a mirror." She looked up at him, eyes wide, shadowed with exhaustion. "What are you talking about?" "The pact," he said, crouching beside her. "It wasn't just blood. It was truth. They wanted honesty, unvarnished, unshielded. That's the tribute." A bitter laugh escaped her. "You're joking. After everything, the Winter Court wants confessions." "Not just any confessions," he said softly. "The ones we've buried." The silence that followed was deep, thick with memory. Outside, the wind howled through the ruins above, but beneath the earth, time seemed to still. Then slowly Hermione nodded. "If it breaks the freeze, if it stops the spreading, then yes, I'll speak." Draco swallowed. The dagger hummed in his hand, growing warmer despite the cold. "I'll go first." He didn't look at her as he began. His voice was low, almost gentle, stripped of its usual edge. "I regret the room of requirement, not because I failed, but because I wanted to believe I was strong enough to do it alone. I was afraid of my father's shadow, of what would happen if I refused. And when you came, filthy, bruised, still defiant, I didn't just curse you to hurt you. I cursed you because I was jealous. You had something I'd never had, courage that didn't come from pride, conviction that didn't need a family name." Hermione didn't move, her breath stilled. "I've never said that to anyone," he admitted. "Not even to myself." The chamber seemed to sigh. The light dimmed, then flared again, pulsing in time with their heartbeats. Now it was her turn. She closed her eyes. "I regret not trying to understand you sooner," she said. "After the war, I told myself you got what you deserved. But the truth is, I was afraid of what it meant if I pitied you. If I saw you not as a villain, but as someone broken. Because then I'd have to ask why I didn't reach out, why I let the world keep us enemies." She opened her eyes, and they were bright with unshed tears. "And I've admired you, Draco, more than I'd ever admit. The way you rebuilt your name without lying about who you were, the way you walked through fire and didn't become ash." He stared at her, stunned. The cold didn't seem to bite as deeply anymore. "I hated how you looked at me," he whispered, "like you could see every flaw. But now I think I needed that." The dagger trembled, then dissolved into motes of silver light that spiraled upward, weaving into the archway. The sigil beneath them glowed gold for a fleeting moment, warm, alive, before the frost began to recede, inch by inch. They sat in silence, shoulders nearly touching, breath mingling in the thinning cold. Outside, the first bird song of dawn pierced the stillness. The air in the hidden chamber beneath Malfoy Manor tasted of frost and iron, each breath a thin blade against the throat. Hermione's fingers trembled, not from cold, though the temperature had dropped so low that her breath hung in slow, shimmering curls, but from the weight of what lay before them. At the center of the circular dais, wreathed in frost-laced ivy that pulsed faintly blue, rested a shard of ice, no larger than a palm. It did not reflect the torchlight. It swallowed it. Draco stood beside her, his posture rigid, jaw clenched, so tight a muscle twitched beneath his pale skin. He hadn't spoken since the Fey emissary, tall, silver-eyed, cloaked in what looked like frozen breath, had placed the shard upon the stone and vanished into mist. Now only the two of them remained, bound by silence and something far heavier, necessity. "It's not just ice," Hermione whispered, more to herself than to him. "Alive. It's a track," Draco said, voice low, edged with the suspicion that had been his armor since childhood. They're testing us, or baiting us. She stepped forward, ignoring the warning in his tone. They said it holds her memory, the Queen's, the first Winter Queen. If we can reach it, understand it, we might learn why the pact was broken, why they've returned. And if it shatters your mind in the process? He caught her wrist before she could touch it. His hand was cold, but not from the room. You felt what happened to Astoria, Hermione. One touch, and she didn't speak for 3 days, just stared at the ceiling, whispering in a language no one knew. Hermione met his gaze. In the dim spectral light, his eyes were storm-gray, haunted. Then I'll scream in tongues too, if it means we stop the frost from reaching Hogwarts, from reaching Muggle cities. You felt it this morning, plants freezing mid-blue, rivers locking in their flow. This isn't natural magic. It's vengeance. He didn't let go of her wrist. For a heartbeat they stood like that, two people who had once thrown curses at each other across great hall tables, now tethered by something neither could name. Finally he exhaled. Then do it. But I'm not letting go. She nodded, then turned back to the shard. Slowly, deliberately, she pressed her free hand against the ice. A shock, like drowning in starlight, ripped through her. Visions flooded in. A forest older than time, its trees whelping silver sap. A throne carved from the heart of a glacier. A woman with hair like frozen lightning, singing a lullaby that made the stars tremble. Then pain, searing, ancient. A betrayal. A wizard's hand plunging a dagger forged from summer's first light into the Queen's chest. The pact, not broken by the Fae, but severed by those who feared their power. Hermione gasped, wrenching back, but the shard held her fingers fast, the ice crawling up her skin like vines. "Hermione!" Draco shouted, pulling at her arm. But she was gone, eyes rolled white, lips moving in silent rhythm. Inside the vision, she stood in the snow-covered ruins of a forgotten temple. The Queen was there, not as a memory, but as a presence, tall and terrible, her dress woven from frost and sorrow. "You are not of my blood," the Queen's voice echoed without sound, "yet you carry fire in your bones. Why do you seek me?" "Because your grief is killing us," Hermione said, her voice not her own. "And theirs. The pact wasn't broken by your kind, it was torn by fear." A pause, the wind stilled. "And what would you have me do?" "Mercy is a flame that dies in winter, not mercy," Hermione said. "Truth, let us mend what was shattered, not with tribute, but with justice." The ice around her hand began to crack. A single tear, frozen before it could fall, slid down the Queen's cheek. Then, release. Hermione collapsed. Draco caught her before she hit the stone, lowering her gently, his arms shaking. The shard lay dark now, inert. But in the silence that followed, something new lingered, the faint scent of pine and the distant echo of a lullaby. Snow crunched beneath Hermione's boots, brittle and sharp as glass. The air above ground was thin, biting, but it carried a scent she hadn't realized she'd missed. Wood smoke, damp earth, the faint tang of rain on stone. She drew it in deeply, her breath foughting before her. Above the sky hung pale and wintry, the sun a milky disk behind drifting clouds. It was real. They were back. Draco stood a few paces behind, his shoulders stiff beneath the weight of his father's old cloak, its silver embroidery dulled by frost. He didn't speak, but his fingers curled and uncurled at his sides, as though testing the air, confirming he wasn't still trapped in the endless corridors of ice. His breath came slow, measured. When he finally turned his head toward her, his eyes were shadowed. The gray of them storm softened. "We've been gone too long," he said. Hermione frowned. "We were under for 3 days, I counted." "No," he said, voice low. "It's been longer. I can feel it." They had emerged from the hidden fissure in the Wiltshire hills just before dawn, the entrance sealing behind them with a groan of stone and a whisper of wind that sounded almost like mourning. The Fae Court, the Winter Court, had not pursued them. They had been allowed to leave, but not unmarked. Hermione's left hand still bore the faint tracery of silver veins, where the Queen had pressed her palm, sealing the pact. Warmth flared there sometimes, like a distant pulse. A crow cried overhead. Hermione flinched. There were too many of them now, perched in the skeletal branches of the hedgerows, watching with beady, knowing eyes. Not ordinary birds, not anymore. They walked in silence toward the nearest village, their steps slow, bodies aching from days spent in the hush of frozen halls. The world felt louder, somehow, even in its stillness, too loud. The rustle of dry leaves, the distant bark of a dog, each sound was a jolt, a reminder of a life that had continued without them. When they reached the edge of Upper Lambourn, Hermione froze. The sign at the village entrance had changed. Where once it read, "Welcome to Upper Lambourn," as 1214, the wood was cracked, the paint peeling. Scratched into the surface, as if by claw or nail, was a different message. Time bends. Here, beware the hollow hours. She touched the wood. It was cold, but not with winter's chill. Something deeper, something older. Draco stepped up beside her. That wasn't there before. "No," she whispered. They moved through the village like ghosts. Shutters were closed tight, curtains drawn. The pub was boarded up, its windows shattered. A single lantern flickered in the apothecary window. Muggle, electric. But the sign above it was written in runes. Hermione hadn't seen since the Fey library beneath the ice. "Ilara," Draco murmured, reading them aloud. "Guardian of the Threshold, Keeper of the Between." Hermione's blood ran colder than it had in the Fey court. "That's not English. That's not even Latin. It's Old Northern," he said, voice tight. "My mother used to speak it when she thought no one was listening." A door creaked open down the lane. An old woman peered out, her face lined, one eye milky with cataract. She held a broom like a weapon. "You're back," she said, not unkindly. "I told them you would be." Hermione stepped forward. "We've only been gone a few days. What happened here?" The woman laughed, a dry, brittle sound. "Days. Child, you've been gone 3 weeks, and the frost's been spreading since the night you disappeared. Crops won't grow. Animals won't breed. The clocks have stopped in every house. Time doesn't move right no more." Draco's breath caught. 3 weeks, the woman nodded. "And the crows talk now. They say the old ones are waking. That the debt must be paid." Hermione looked at her hands, then at Draco. His face was pale, but his jaw was set. He met her gaze. "They're not just returning," he said. "They're rewriting the world." She nodded slowly. "And we're the only ones who know how to stop it." For the first time since they'd left the ice, Draco reached for her hand. His fingers were cold, but they held on. "Then we'd better start," he said, "before there's nothing left to save." The fire in the hearth had burned low, casting long, trembling shadows across the stone walls of the hidden chamber, beneath the Malfoy library. Dust hung in the air like suspended time, stirred only by the occasional turn of a brittle page. Hermione's fingers trembled, not from cold, though the room had grown steadily frigid since they'd breached the wards, but from the weight of what she now held in her hands. "It's not a binding," she whispered, her breath curling in frosty wisps. "It's a seal." Draco, leaning against a bookshelf with arms crossed, didn't move. His silver eyes flicked toward her, wary. "Say that again." She didn't look up. Her gaze was locked on the ancient vellum spread before her, its surface etched with a sigil composed of interlocking runes that pulsed faintly, like a dying heartbeat. The sigil beneath Wiltshire. It's not just holding the winter court in stasis, it's containing them. If we break it to stop the curse, the Fae won't just wake. They'll be free. Unbound. The silence settled, thick and suffocating. Even the crackle of the fire seemed to pause. "And if we don't break it?" Draco asked, his voice low, measured. "Then the cold spreads. The magic bleeds outward. First the countryside, then the cities. By midwinter, Hogwarts will be a tomb of ice. London will follow. The Ministry's wards won't hold. Nothing will." She finally looked at him, her face pale in the dim light. The sigil was never meant to last. It was a compromise, an old bargain between the first Malfoys and the Winter Queen. Blood for peace, tribute for containment. Draco's jaw tightened. "We've been paying tribute for centuries. Crops, livestock, tokens. Not enough anymore," she said. "The pact is fraying. The Fae remember what was promised, and they're waking hungry." He pushed off the shelf, stepping closer. His boots echoed against the stone. "So our choices are, let them freeze the country, or set them loose to do it themselves." Hermione closed her eyes. "There has to be another way, a third path. The runes here, they're not just about binding or release. There's a resonance, a call. Like the sigil was meant to be renewed, not broken. Renewed how? She hesitated. With blood. But not just any blood. It says, the heart's consent, the hand's surrender, the line's true heir. She opened her eyes. Draco, it needs a willing sacrifice from your bloodline, not a tribute, a choice. He went very still. You're saying I'd have to, what, offer myself? To the Fae. No, she said quickly. Not like that, not a victim, a steward, a bridge. The sigil wants balance, not domination, not destruction. It wants someone to stand in the threshold, to say yes and mean it. He stared at her, then at the pulsing sigil on the page. And if I refuse, then the seal cracks anyway. But without consent, without ritual balance, the Fae won't just rise, they'll rage. And the cold won't stop until every spark of warmth in Britain is extinguished. Outside, a wind moaned through the trees, clawing at the manor's windows. Snow began to fall again, thick and silent, blanketing the land in white. Draco exhaled, a cloud forming before his lips. All my life I've been told what my name demands, what my blood requires: obedience, power, legacy. He looked at her then, really looked, his gaze searching, uncertain. But this isn't about power. It's about something else. Hermione stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth of him despite the cold. It's about choice and trust, not just yours, but theirs. The Fae don't understand compromise. They understand oaths. If you offer yourself not out of fear but belief, maybe, just maybe, they'll honor it. He studied her face, the smudge of ink on her cheek, the stubborn set of her jaw, the quiet fire in her eyes that had never once faltered, not even when the world turned to ice. Then you'd stand with me, he said, not a question. She reached out, her fingers brushing his. Always. The sigil on the page flared once, soft, blue, like a breath returning to life. Snow fell in silent flurries over the Malfoy estate, each flake a whisper of the cold that now lived in Draco's bones. He stood at the edge of the frozen lake, hands buried in the pockets of his black wool coat, breath curling in pale wisps before him. The trees were brittle with ice, their branches clawing at the iron-gray sky, and the air carried a scent not of winter, but of something older, mint and frost, iron and hawthorn, the breath of a world waking from centuries of slumber. The summons had come at dawn, a silver thread wound around a raven's claw, the script shimmering like starlight on ice. The court remembers its debt. The blood must answer, no signature, no seal, just the weight of words that sank into his chest like blades. He had not told his mother, not yet. How could he? She already bore the weight of their name, the quiet shame of survival, the slow erosion of dignity that came with being a Malfoy in a world that no longer feared them. And now this ancient claim rising from beneath Wiltshire, from the buried vaults where the Winter Court had lain entombed in crystal and silence. Hermione had been the one to find the truth buried in the restricted section, her fingers tracing glyphs older than Hogwarts. It's a pact, she'd said, voice hushed, eyes wide with something between awe and dread. Not a treaty, a bond, blood for passage, protection for service. Your family, yours, Draco, was named in the first charter. He had laughed then, a short, brittle sound. You expect me to believe my ancestors signed a contract with fairies? Not fairies, she had corrected, soft but firm. The Winter Court, and yes, they kept you safe through the war, through everything, and now they've awakened, they want what's owed. He looked down at his gloved hand, imagining the sigil that burned beneath the skin, unseen but felt. A pull in his wrist, a chill that never left. It had started the night the first frost cracked the greenhouse glass, the night he dreamt of silver thrones and a woman with eyes like frozen stars who whispered his name. If he refused, what would they take? His mother? His name? His life? And if he complied? He clenched his jaw. Complying meant opening the gate, meant standing before the court and offering what blood they demanded, meant becoming what his father had always wanted, a servant of old powers, draped in ice and pride. But then there was Hermione. Always Hermione. She had not flinched when he told her of the dream, had not mocked him when his voice cracked. Instead, she had placed a hand on his arm, warm, steady, and said, "We'll find another way." Another way. He turned slightly, catching sight of her through the bare trees. She stood near the manor's west wing, wrapped in a thick cloak, her breath clouding the air as she studied a scrap of parchment. Even from a distance, he could see the furrow in her brow, the way her fingers worried the edge of the page. She was searching, always searching. And for what? A loophole, a counter-charm, a way to break a bond older than ministry itself. He wanted to believe her. Gods, he did, but the cold in his blood whispered otherwise. What if there was no other way? What if the only choice was how much he was willing to lose? A raven called from the eaves of the house, its cry sharp against the silence. And another, then another, until the air was full of them, circling like omens. Draco closed his eyes. Somewhere beneath the earth, the court waited, and the clock was ticking. The wind howled through the broken arches of Avalon, like a mourning spirit, carrying with it the scent of frost and wet stone. Hermione pulled her cloak tighter, breath plumbing in the air as she stepped over a collapsed column, its surface etched with runes long faded. The ruins stretched before them, twisted spires half swallowed by ivy, pools of black water reflecting a sky choked with iron-gray clouds. It was colder here than anywhere else in Britain, even in the heart of the Malfoy estate, where the Winter Court's influence had first taken root. Draco walked ahead, his silver-blonde hair catching what little light remained, his wand raised. He moved with a quiet precision, eyes scanning the ground, the walls, the spaces between shadows. Once he would have sneered at the idea of setting foot in a place like this, ancient, wild, untamed. But now his jaw was set, his voice steady when he spoke. "There's something beneath the central chamber," he said. "Not stone, not earth. It's pulsing." Hermione frowned. "Pulsing, like a heartbeat." He glanced back at her, his gray eyes sharp. "You felt it too, didn't you, when we crossed the threshold?" A warmth. She hesitated. She had. A flicker beneath her ribs, like a spark catching in dry tinder. Not magic as she knew it, no incantation, no wand movement, but something older. Something that remembered fire. They descended a staircase carved into the living rock, the steps slick with moss and time. The air changed as they went deeper. Less biting, more charged, humming with a low resonance that made Hermione's teeth ache. At the bottom, a circular chamber opened before them, its walls lined with blackened braziers. In the center stood a pedestal, cracked and scorched, cradling a single, unlit flame. Not real, not yet, but it shimmered, a phantom fire trapped in glass. "This is it," Hermione whispered. "The origin point. The first flame." Draco stepped forward, hand outstretched, but she caught his wrist. "Wait. We don't know what it'll do. And if we wait, Wiltshire turns to ice, and the Malfoy line pays the price in blood." His voice was low, strained. "You think I don't know what's at stake? My mother's already half frozen in her own drawing room." She let go, but only because she saw the truth in his eyes. Fear, yes, but not for himself. For her, for the world that had never given him grace, and yet he was still trying to save it. She stepped forward and placed her palm flat against the glass. Heat surged, not burning, but alive. Images flashed behind her eyes, women with hair like molten copper dancing barefoot on stone, hands raised to the sky, a crown of fire descending upon a kneeling figure, a vow spoken in a language older than Latin. Blood for fire, life for light. She gasped, pulling back. "It's a bargain, not a spell, a pact." Draco's voice was rough. "What kind of pact?" "The first fire mages offered their blood to kindle the flame, not to control it, to feed it. And it protected them in return." She looked at him, heart pounding. "The Winter Court doesn't want tribute, it wants balance, but we've forgotten how to give." He exhaled sharply. "So what do we do? Bleed on the damn thing. Not just blood. Intent. Sacrifice." She met his gaze. "Someone has to reignite it. Willingly." Silence stretched between them, brittle as ice. Then Draco stepped forward and drew his wand across his palm. Blood-welled, dark, and glistening. "Malfoy, no, I'm not doing it for you," he said, voice tight. "I'm doing it for the girl who once told me that anyone could change. Even me." He pressed his hand to the glass. The chamber exploded with light. Fire roared to life, not consuming, but rising, golden and fierce, swirling up the walls in ribbons of heat. The runes on the pedestal flared, ancient words, blazing in tongues of crimson and amber. The ground trembled, and for a breath, Hermione thought it would collapse. Then stillness. The flame burned steady now, real, singing in the dark. Draco swayed, pale but upright. Hermione caught his arm, her fingers brushing his skin, warm for the first time in weeks. "You're an idiot," she whispered. He smirked, weak but genuine. "But I'm your idiot." Outside, the wind stilled. Somewhere far away, snow began to melt. The air in the hidden chamber beneath Malfoy Manor tasted of frost and old iron, each breath a knife in Hermione's lungs. The walls, carved from black stone veined with shimmering silver, pulsed faintly, as though alive beneath the weight of centuries. Before them stood the Keeper, a being neither wholly man nor spirit, but something older, stitched together from shadow and glacial wind. His eyes were chips of amethyst, reflecting not the torchlight, but something deeper, colder. He had not spoken since they'd crossed the threshold, only watched, his breath forming slow spirals of mist that never dissipated. Draco shifted beside her, his cloak pulled tightly around his shoulders. "We've come in good faith," he said, voice low but steady. "We seek understanding, not war." The Keeper turned his head, a motion too smooth to be human. "Faith is a fragile thing," he murmured, "and warmth even more so. You burn bright, mortals, too bright." "A candle in a storm," Hermione swallowed, stepping forward. "Then tell us how to keep the flame." A silence stretched, broken only by the distant groan of shifting ice far below. Then the Keeper reached into the folds of his tattered robe and withdrew a shard of translucent crystal, its core flickering with a soft blue light. "This was once a heart," he said, "a fey heart, bound to a human through love. It lasted 3 mortal lifetimes before it cracked. Your kind, you love fiercely, but it consumes you. Your passions, your griefs, they are fires that devour their own fuel." Draco's jaw tightened. "And yours don't?" "We endure," the Keeper said simply. "We do not burn, we freeze, we wait, we remember. Your hearts are not made for eternity. They break under the weight of it." Hermione felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "You're saying love is our weakness." "No," he said, and for the first time there was something like sorrow in his voice. "I am saying it is your strength and your doom. The Winter Court does not hate you for loving. It pities you. To feel so deeply, and to know it cannot last. That is the true curse." A gust of wind swept through the chamber, extinguishing 2 of the torches. Shadows leapt and twisted. Draco moved instinctively, stepping closer to Hermione, his shoulder brushing hers. She didn't pull away. "The pact your ancestors made," the Keeper continued, "was not born of fear, but of desperation. They gave tribute, magic, memory, blood, not because they were conquered, but because they understood. The cold would come, it always returns, and only through balance can the world remain whole. And if we refuse," Draco asked, "then the frost spreads, not as punishment. As nature, the world seeks equilibrium. If warmth overreaches, cold answers. If love rages unchecked, ice follows to still the chaos." Hermione thought of Harry's laugh, of Ginny's fierce courage, of Ron's unwavering loyalty, how each of them had sacrificed, loved, burned. Was that all destined to fade, swallowed by something ancient and different? That there must be another way, she pressed, not just tribute, not just submission. The Keeper studied her, then tilted the crystal shard toward her chest. It pulsed once, brighter. "You carry warmth enough to thaw a glacier. But for how long, even now, I see the cracks forming, fatigue, doubt, the weight of choices made in darkness. You cannot sustain this fire forever." Draco's voice was quiet when he spoke again. "Then we don't have to, we just have to last long enough." The Keeper looked between them, witch and wizard, enemies once, now standing side by side in the belly of an ancient house, breathing the same cold air, sharing the same fragile heat. For the first time, the being's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. "You may yet surprise us," he said. "But remember, when the ice comes, it does not stop for love. It only waits." The air in the hidden chamber beneath Malfoy Manor tasted of iron and frost. Hermione's breath curled in front of her like smoke, each exhale a fleeting defiance against the creeping cold that gnawed at her bones. Around her, the walls were etched with runes older than Hogwarts, glowing faintly blue with dormant fey magic. She knelt on a circle of salt and ash, her fingers tracing the final sigil of her spell, a spiral meant to cradle heat like a heart cradles blood. Draco stood near the archway, arms crossed, his breath steady, but his jaw tight. He didn't trust this. He didn't trust her. Not entirely. And still he hadn't stopped her. "It'll burn you if it goes wrong," he said, voice low. "Not just you. It could fracture the wards. Then they'll come." "I know," she whispered. "But if we don't try something, the frost spreads. Another week, and Hogsmeade will be buried. 2 weeks, London." She didn't look at him. Her focus was on the small silver vial in her palm, filled with melted glacier water from the heart of the Winter Court's frozen throne. It shimmered, alive with cold so pure it made her teeth ache. Next to it, a vial of her own blood, warmed by a whispered incantation. The spell was madness, a contradiction. To summon warmth in a place built on eternal winter, to force stillness upon magic that thrived on motion, it was like asking fire to bow to ice. But Hermione had studied the old texts, the fragmented trees, the lullabies sung in forgotten tongues. The Winter Fair revered balance. They feared disruption, yes, but they also respected power, especially power that defied their nature. She dipped her wand into the blood, then into the glacial water. The mixture hissed, steaming as if repelled by itself. "Lux sine flamma," she murmured. "Cordis sine motu. Stare in medio." The runes on the floor flared, first red, then white, then a deep, pulsing violet. A wind, silent and sharp, swept through the chamber, lifting her hair. Draco stepped back, one hand braced against the wall. "Hermione, not yet," she said through gritted teeth. "It's not ready." She raised both vials above the sigil and let them fall. They shattered. The liquids met, but instead of mixing, they recoiled, swirling in opposing spirals. The blood pulsed like a heartbeat. The glacial water coiled like a serpent. Hermione pressed her palms to the stone. "I offer warmth not to destroy, but to endure. I offer stillness not to bind, but to listen. Let us speak, let us bargain." The air cracked. A light erupted, not fire, not frost, but something in between. Golden threads wove through silver, forming a lattice that hovered above the circle. The temperature spiked, then dropped. Her skin burned and froze at once. She cried out, but didn't move. Visions flickered in the light. A woman with eyes like winter stars, seated on the throne of ice and thorns. A child with antlers of frost weeping as the sun rose. A pact, sealed in blood and breath, buried beneath centuries of silence. And then, understanding. The spell held. The lattice pulsed once, twice, and collapsed into a single ember that hovered above her hands, glowing like a heartbeat. Silence. Draco exhaled. Did you just tame a fey storm?" "I think," she said, trembling. "I just asked for a truce." The ember drifted down, settling in her palm. It didn't burn. It pulsed, gentle and warm, like a promise. Above them, a faint tremor shook the manor. Somewhere deep beneath the earth, the frozen court stirred, not in anger, but in attention. And for the first time in centuries, something warm had spoken its name. The wind howled like a wounded beast, tearing through the skeletal trees of Wiltshire with claws of ice. Snow fell in thick, swirling sheets, not from clouds but from the sky itself unraveling, crackling with silver veins of ancient enchantment. Hermione Granger pulled her cloak tighter, the fabric stiff with frost, her breath pluming in front of her like smoke from a dying fire. She could feel it, the weight of the storm, unnatural and sentient, pressing down on her chest as if the air had grown teeth. Beside her, Draco Malfoy stood rigid, his pale face half illuminated by the flickering blue light emanating from the fissure in the earth. It pulsed like a heartbeat, a wound in the world, and from it rose the scent of pine needles and iron, of bitter cold and older things, oaths carved in bone, promises whispered in the dark. "It's waking," he said, voice low, almost reverent. "They're coming." Hermione turned to him, her fingers numb around her wand. "Then we've run out of time." The ground trembled. A low resonant chime rang through the air, not from any bell, but from the stones themselves, vibrating with a power that made her teeth ache. From the fissure, shapes began to rise, tall, slender figures wrapped in cloaks of rime and shadow, their faces obscured by masks of ice that shifted like living frost. Their eyes, when visible, were the color of frozen lakes, pale, depthless, ancient. The winter court. One stepped forward, taller than the rest, a crown of blackened antlers fused with icicles resting atop their brow. They raised a hand, and the blizzard stilled for a breath, just one, before settling into a watchful hush. "You are not the blood promised," the Fae said, their voice like wind through frozen reeds. Hermione swallowed. The Malfoys answered the summons. "Draco is here." The Fae tilted their head, studied Draco with an emotion that wasn't quite curiosity. "Blood remembers," they murmured, "but blood forgets." The pact was sealed with more than name. Draco stepped forward, jaw tight. "My ancestors bound themselves to your service. I stand in their place. Do you?" The Fae's gaze flickered to Hermione. "And she? Mortal? Untouched by old magic. She does not belong." "She's with me," Draco said sharply. "And she's not just any witch." A ripple passed through the assembled court. One of the lesser Fae leaned toward the leader, whispering in a language that stung Hermione's ears. She caught fragments: warmth, defiance, the flame that refuses winter. The crowned Fae turned back. The world above grew soft. It forgot winter's dominion. But the cold remembers. The earth remembers. And now the dead is called. Hermione forced herself to speak, her voice trembling but clear. "If there's a death, we'll honor it, but not through fear, not through destruction." A slow, soundless laugh curled across the Fae's hidden face. "You speak of honor? You who broke the old ways with every spell you cast, every boundary you crossed." "We didn't know," she said, "but we know now." Another tremor shook the ground. The fissure widened, and from it rose a structure. Crystalline spires, arches of frozen moonlight, a palace of ice rising from the earth like a memory made real. The court turned as one, their forms gliding towards the emerging fortress with silent grace. The crowned Fae lingered. "You have until the moon is whole again," they said. "Bring the tribute, blood, memory, and offering, or the frost will not stop until every hearth is ash and every heart is still." Then they were gone, vanishing into the storm as if they had never been. Hermione exhaled, her body trembling, not just from cold, but from the weight of what they'd seen. Draco stood motionless, his hands clenched at his sides. "They want more than just an offering," he said quietly. "They want balance. Or revenge." She looked at him, really looked. His hollowed cheeks, the shadows under his eyes, the pride still clinging to him like frost to stone. "Then we find what they're owed, and we give it, on our terms." He met her gaze, and for the first time there was no sneer, no barrier, just understanding, fragile as a thawing icicle. "On our terms," he agreed. Above them, the storm began to churn again, whispering of longer nights to come. The air inside the cathedral was thick with the scent of frost and old stone, each breath a knife in the lungs. Moonlight spilled through the fractured stained glass, painting the frozen cues in fractured blues and violets. Ice clung to the arches like ivy, creeping down the columns in crystalline veins. Draco stepped forward first, his boots cracking the thin sheet of rime that coated the floor. He didn't look at Hermione, but he felt her presence behind him, steady, warm, a small defiance against the encroaching cold. "She's waiting," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "I know," Hermione whispered. Her fingers brushed the hilt of the dagger at her belt, the one forged from melted Fae silver, and tempered with phoenix ash. It hummed faintly, as if sensing the weight of what lay ahead. They moved together down the nave, their shadows long and thin beneath the spectral light. The altar at the far end had been transformed. A throne of jagged ice now rose where the communion table had stood, and upon it the Winter Queen sat, her crown of frozen thorns catching the light like shattered stars. Her eyes opened before they reached her, ancient and depthless, like cracks in a glacier. "You return," she said, her voice the sound of wind through bare branches, "and you bring fire in your chest, mud blood and pure blood, standing side by side." "How?" "Quite." Hermione did not flinch. "The pact is broken. The blood tribute ends here. The queen tilted her head, a slow, predatory motion. Broken? No. Forgotten, perhaps. Ignored. But the earth remembers. The blood remembers. Your ancestors bowed. They offered their firstborn sons, their unwed daughters, their strongest magic, all to keep the frost at bay. And now you dare speak of ending. Draco stepped forward, his voice steady despite the chill gnawing at his bones. We dare because we understand what you are. Not a goddess, not a sovereign. You are a consequence, a wound in the world that never healed. A silence fell, brittle as ice. Then the queen laughed, a sound like cracking ice on a frozen lake. Clever boy, but understanding does not grant immunity. She raised a hand and the temperature dropped. Frost spiderwebbed across the floor, racing toward them. Hermione drew the dagger, its blade flaring with a soft golden light. The cold recoiled, just for a moment. We're not here to fight you, Hermione said. We're here to offer something better. The queen stilled. Better? A new pact, Draco said. Not of blood, of balance. Let the seasons turn as they should. Let spring return. In exchange we offer remembrance. Not sacrifice, memory, stories, names. We will not forget you, but we will not feed you. The queen rose from her throne, her form elongating, her presence swelling like a storm gathering. You speak of warmth, as if it is strength, but warmth fades, fire dies. Frost remains. Hermione stepped forward, her voice firm, and yet, every winter ends, not because the cold is defeated, but because life refuses to stay buried. For a long moment, the cathedral held its breath. Then, softly, the queen asked, What is your name? Mortal. Hermione Granger. And yours? Draco Lucius Malfoy. The queen's breath curled like silver smoke. You stand where kings knelt. You speak where others screamed. And yet, you do not tremble. We're afraid, Hermione admitted, but we're not alone. A pause. The ice on the walls shivered. Then slowly, the throne began to melt. Water dripped like tears into the stone. The light through the stained glass shifted. Warmer, softer. Somewhere, deep beneath the earth, a chime rang, faint, but clear. The queen did not vanish. She faded, like mist, at dawn, her voice the last whisper on the wind. Let the world remember, and let it live. Draco exhaled, his breath, a cloud in the thinning cold. He turned to Hermione. Her face was pale, her eyes bright. It's over, he said. She nodded. For now. Outside, the first bird song of morning pierced the silence. The air in the chamber was so cold it burned to breathe. Each inhaled a blade of ice slicing down Draco's throat. He stood barefoot on the black marble floor, frost blooming beneath his feet like creeping veins. Before him, the Winter Queen sat upon a throne carved from glacial ice and ancient bone, her silver hair spilling like frozen starlight across her shoulders. Her eyes, pale, depthless, older than stone, held his with a stillness that made his pulse stutter. You tremble, she observed, voice like wind through dead branches. Draco clenched his jaw. I'm not afraid. A lie, she murmured, lifting a hand. A spiral of frost coiled from her fingertip, curling through the air toward him. It brushed his cheek, and for a moment he saw visions, endless winters, silent halls, a crown of thorns and ice upon his brow. You will not age, you will not die, you will stand beside me as the centuries pass, untouched by time, unbroken by decay. That is my offer. He swallowed, throat dry despite the cold. And what do you want in return? Loyalty, she said simply. Your blood remembers the pact, Draco Malfoy. Your ancestors knelt in this hall. They swore fealty beneath the first mood of the long frost. You are the last true heir of that line. Your word will bind the house anew. He thought of the manor, of Lucius, pale and hollow-eyed. After Azkaban, of Narcissa's whispered prayers to forgotten gods. He thought of the locket he'd once carried, heavy with dark magic, and how easy it had been to believe in purity, in power, in legacy. But then he thought of Hermione. She had been the first to step into the fey glade with him, wand alight, breath fogging the air like a defiant spark. She had argued with the courtiers in their own tongue, cracked ancient runes of trembling fingers, and when the ice had risen to swallow them, she had gripped his arm and said, We're not dying here. Not like this. He had felt something then, something warm, something real, beneath all the pride and fear. "I cannot give you my soul," he said, voice low. The Queen's smile was thin, cruel. "You think you have a choice. The frost is already in your blood. I can feel it, the pull of your ancestors, the hum of old magic in your veins. It will take you, whether you consent or not." "Then let it," Draco said, lifting his chin. "But I won't serve you, not if it means turning my back on what's left of the world." Silence fell, thick and suffocating. The frost on the walls pulsed, like a heartbeat. "You are not as strong as you believe," she whispered. "No," he admitted. "But I'm not alone." At that, a flicker. Deep in the shadows beyond the throne, a ripple in the ice. A figure emerged, cloaked in ash-gray wool, firelight dancing in her eyes. Hermione stepped forward, her breath visible, her wand held steady. "You don't have to answer for the sins of your bloodline," she said to him. But her gaze was on the Queen. "The pact was made in fear. It doesn't have to be honored in silence." The Queen rose, her form elongating shadows stretching like claws across the floor. "You dare speak in this court, mortal?" "I do," Hermione said. "Because magic doesn't belong to you. It belongs to those who remember what it means to feel, to love, to hope, to choose. And Draco chooses." Draco looked at her, then really looked. At the smudge of dirt on her cheek, the crack in her lip from the cold, the fire that refused to die in her eyes. He stepped back from the throne. "I choose warmth," he said. The chamber trembled, ice cracked, and somewhere, deep beneath the earth, something ancient exhaled, disappointed, but not defeated. The air in the chamber was thick with silence and the weight of centuries. Ice clung to the stone walls like a second skin, glittering faintly in the pale blue light that pulsed from the frozen throne at the room's heart. Before it, Hermione stood, breath shallow, hands trembling as she cradled the shard of the Winter Queen's heart, a jagged sliver of enchanted ice that pulsed with a cold so deep it made her bones ache. Draco had warned her. "You touch that, and it'll take everything," he'd said, his voice uncharacteristically raw. Not just warmth, life, but there was no one else. The court was frozen in place, lords and ladies locked in glittering mid-gesture, their faces caught between sorrow and fury. The land above was already dying. Crops withered beneath unexpected frosts. Rivers in the highlands had begun to freeze in July, and the cold was spreading, creeping southward like a slow breath, held too long. Hermione knelt. She pressed the shard to her chest, just over her heart. The cold hit like a curse, sharp, immediate, stealing her breath in a single gasp. Her fingers turned white, then blue, the skin tightening as if pulled by invisible strings. She bit back a cry, teeth chattering as the frost began to crawl up her arms, delicate silver tendrils snaking beneath her sleeves. But she didn't pull away. Instead, she closed her eyes and thought of warmth. Not magic, not spells or incantations, but the sun on her face during summer at the Burrow, the steam rising from a mug of tea in the Gryffindor common room. Ron's laughter, loud and sudden, echoing through the corridors. Harry's hand on her shoulder after a long night of studying, the way Ginny would squeeze her hand when she was afraid. And then, unexpectedly, Draco. The way he'd looked at her in the library 3 nights ago, when he thought she wasn't watching. The quiet way he'd handed her his coat when the wind howled through the broken windows of the manor. The way he'd said her name, Granger, not with sneer but with something softer, almost reverent. Warmth isn't absence of cold, she thought, teeth clenched. It's presence, it's choice. She poured every memory into the shard, not as fuel, but as offering. The ice trembled. A crack split its surface, thin as a whisper. Then another. The cold deepened, searing now, as if her heart were being hollowed. Her vision blurred. She felt herself slipping, her body growing light, distant. She couldn't feel her legs. Her breath came in shallow white puffs that barely stirred the air. But the shard glowed, faintly, then stronger, a pulse of amber light blooming from within. A sound, like glass breaking under moonlight, filled the chamber. The throne cracked, and from the ice, a breath. Then a voice, low and ancient, laced with snow and sorrow. "You burn, little mortal." Hermione forced her eyes open. Before her the queen stood, pale as frost, eyes like winter stars, but no longer frozen. Her silver hair fell in waves, and her gown, once brittle with ice, now shimmered like dawn on snow. But something had changed in her face, a softening, a shadow of grief, of memory. "I had forgotten," the queen whispered, kneeling beside her. "What it costs to be cruel." Hermione tried to speak, but only a gasp came. The queen touched her cheek, once gently, and the cold retreated, not with force, but with release. "You gave me back my heart," she said. "Not by magic, by mercy." And as the ice in the chamber began to melt, dripping like tears from the ceiling, someone shouted her name. Draco burst through the archway, his face ashen, coat torn, wand raised, only to freeze when he saw her. She was pale, shivering, but alive, and smiling. He crossed the room in 3 strides, dropping to his knees, catching her before she could fall. "You absolute fool," he whispered, voice breaking. Hermione leaned into him, her fingers curling weakly into the front of his robes. "Was worth it," she breathed. Outside, the first bird song in months echoed across the Wiltshire hills. The air in the chamber was still, thick with the scent of frostbitten lilies and old parchment. Hermione stood just beyond the dais, her breath curling in pale wisps before her. The queen did not move, had not moved in hours, it seemed, but her eyes, silver like moonlight on frozen lakes, were alive with memory. Draco exhaled sharply. "You're saying it began with love?" The queen turned her head, slow as a glacier shifting. "You think love cannot build empires, Malfoy? That it cannot bind realms?" Her voice was quiet, but it filled the vast hall like the hush before a storm. "It was not conquest that first opened the gates between our worlds. It was a mortal woman's laughter in a winter grove, a fey prince who dared to listen." Hermione stepped forward, her boots silent on the ice-carved floor. "Who was she?" "Her name was Alara," the queen said, and for the first time something softened in her gaze. "Daughter of a forgotten house, not noble by your world's standards. But she walked where no mortal had dared, into the heart of the frozen wood, where even magic feared to tread. She didn't come for power, she came because she heard the music." Draco frowned. "Music?" "A song beneath the ice," the queen murmured. "Only the pure of heart could hear it. She followed it for days, through blizzards that would have killed any other, and when she reached the glade, he was waiting. Prince Caelan, last heir of the Winter Court's true bloodline." Hermione felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. They fell in love. The queen's lips curved, a gesture so faint it might have been imagined. "They did, and love, when it is true, becomes magic." Their bond wove a bridge between worlds, not through blood sacrifice, not through oaths carved in stone, but through a promise whispered in the dark. "I see you. I choose you. Even if time forgets us, I will find you again." Draco shifted, his voice rougher than intended. "The pact?" "The first tribute was not a demand," the queen said. "It was a gift. Alara offered a drop of her blood, not because she was forced, but because she wished to carry a piece of him into her world, to anchor the connection. That drop bloomed into the first frost rose, and from its roots the pact was born. A vow that every 7 generations a descendant would return to the glade, bearing a memory, a song, a breath of warmth, to remind the court that love still lived in the mortal world." Hermione's throat tightened, and when they stopped coming, the queen's gaze darkened. "The world forgot, magic waned. Your kind built walls not just of stone but of disbelief. The roses withered, the song faded, and the court froze, not in body, but in sorrow. We became what you feared, cold, distant, hungry, but we did not begin that way." Silence settled, heavy and fragile. Draco looked at Hermione, really looked at her, for the first time without sneer or suspicion. "So all of this," he said, gesturing to the ice-laced ruins around them, "the summons, the tributes, the frosts creeping across the countryside, it's not about dominance." "No," the queen said softly. "It is a plea, a cry across centuries. Remember us. Remember love." Hermione's fingers brushed the locket at her throat, warm against her skin. Inside, a single frost rose petal, found buried in her grandmother's diary, labeled in shaky script. For the girl who hears the wind sing. She hadn't understood it then. Now she did, and in that moment she knew. This was never about war. It was about waking something long buried, something that could still, just barely, be warmed back to life. The air in the hollow beneath Wiltshire tasted of iron and snow, though no storm raged above. Frost climbed the ancient stones in fractal patterns, glittering like crushed diamonds under the dim light of Hermione's wand. The sigil, etched deep into the earth, and reinforced with bones of long-dead wizards, pulsed with a cold blue light that made Draco's teeth ache. He could feel it in his blood, the old magic, tugging at something deep in his marrow like a forgotten promise. "It's not just a binding," Hermione whispered, crouched beside the outer ring. Her breath fogged in the air, but she didn't shiver. Not anymore. "It's a conduit. They'd been feeding off our lineages, drawing strength, renewing the court, every 100 years. We're not just breaking a curse, Draco. We're severing a taproot." Draco knelt beside her, fingers brushing the edge of the sigil. The moment he touched it, a vision flared behind his eyes. His mother, pale and kneeling in a hall of ice, offering a vial of blood to a fey queen with eyes like frozen stars. He flinched back. "They took from us willingly once," he said, voice low. "Our ancestors. They believed they were protecting something. And now it's killing us," Hermione said. "The magic's unstable. The cold isn't stopping at the boundaries anymore. I saw a robin freeze mid-flight yesterday, just shattered when it hit the ground." He looked at her then, really looked. The winter had hollowed her cheeks slightly, but her eyes burned with a fire that refused to be quenched. There was something different about her now, not just the resilience, but the way she moved through magic, as if it were a second skin, learned not from books, but from bone. "We need the frostfire," he said. She nodded, drawing a small vial from her cloak. Inside, a pale blue flame writhed, neither hot nor cold, but both at once. It had taken them 3 nights to summon it, chanting in a dead dialect of Old Brythonic, standing barefoot in the snow under the waning moon. It was the only thing that could dissolve a fey covenant without collapsing the veil between worlds. "We do this together," Hermione said. "Same time, same breath. If one of us falters..." "The whole thing could invert," Draco finished. "And we'd become part of the binding." She reached for his hand. He hesitated. Old instincts, old pride, but then took it. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was steady. They stepped into the circle. The moment they crossed the threshold, the air turned to glass. Sound vanished. The sigil flared, and voices, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, rose in a chorus of whispers, speaking in a language that had no name. Draco felt his pulse slow, his vision narrowing to the vial in Hermione's hand. "Now," she mouthed. They uncorked it together. The frostfire spilled out like liquid starlight, crawling across the sigil in delicate threads. Where it touched, the ice cracked with a sound like breaking crystal. The bones of the sigil's core began to smoke, then dissolve into ash that swirled upward like winter's breath. A wind howled through the chamber, though there was no opening. Shadows stretched and twisted. From the depths of the earth, something screamed, not in rage, but in grief. "It's working," Hermione gasped, her voice cracking. "But it's fighting back." Draco gritted his teeth. The magic in his blood surged, pulled toward the flame, as if the Malfoy line itself was resisting its release. He saw flashes again, his father's face, rigid with pride, his grandmother lighting candles in a forgotten ritual, the family vault, buried under centuries of silence. This was more than blood. It was memory. It was duty. "I said let go," he growled, not to Hermione, but to the past. He poured his will into the frostfire, not as a Malfoy, but as a man who had learned, too late, what it meant to choose. Hermione did the same, whispering words Draco didn't know, her tears freezing before they hit the ground. The sigil shattered. A wave of warmth exploded outward, melting the frost, collapsing the ice pillars, sending ripples through the earth. Above them, miles away, the first thaw in centuries began, snow retreating from the moors, streams cracking free from their icy prisons. They fell to their knees, still holding hands. The cold was receding, and for the first time in 100 years, the land breathed. The first crack split through the cathedral's northern wall like a thunderclap, muffled by snow. Hermione flinched, her fingers tightening around the iron-bound tome she'd pried from the altar's pedestal. Dust rained from the vaulted ceiling, swirling in the pale, unnatural light that pulsed from the frozen runes etched into the stone. Around them the air hummed with a sound like icicles shivering in a wind that wasn't there. "We have to go now," Draco said, voice low but edged with urgency. He didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on the widening fissure, where frost bloomed outward in jagged fractals, creeping down the pillars like liquid silver. Hermione swallowed, her breath fogging in front of her. The wards, they're unraveling. Whatever's holding the court in stasis is breaking. "They weren't meant to last," Draco muttered, stepping toward her. "Only to delay, and we're out of time." Another crack, louder this time, echoed from beneath the floor. The ground trembled, and a section of the mosaic near the dais split open, revealing a yawning darkness below, black and deeper than it should have been. From that void, a cold so sharp it burned seeped upward, carrying with it the scent of pine and iron and something older, like the memory of a storm buried in permafrost. Hermione stumbled back, clutching the book to her chest. "That's not just a tunnel, that's a throat." Draco grabbed her arm, not roughly, but with the kind of firmness that brooked no argument. "Then we don't fall down it. Move." They ran, boots slipping on frost-slicked flagstones. The air thickened, the light dimming as if the very atmosphere were freezing. Behind them, the cathedral groaned, a sound like mountains shifting. A pillar collapsed in a shatter of ice and stone, blocking the main entrance in an avalanche of debris. "No going back," Hermione gasped. Draco veered sharply toward a narrow archway, half hidden behind a tapestry of frozen ivy. "It leads down." "How do you know?" she demanded, even as she followed. "Because my great-great-grandmother's diary mentioned a way out," he shot back. "She barely made it. Said the tunnels wouldn't hold the cold for long." The archway opened into a descending corridor, its walls lined with more of the glowing runes. But these pulsed erratically, flickering between blue and black. The floor sloped steeply, and the air grew heavier, pressing against their ears like deep water. Hermione glanced over her shoulder. The cathedral was vanishing behind a wall of falling ice, the vaults collapsing inward as if the earth itself were swallowing it. "Do you think anyone else got out?" "If they were smart, they ran when the first screams started," Draco said, though his voice softened slightly. "But no, probably not." They descended in silence, the only sounds their ragged breaths and the distant rumble of stone giving way. The tunnel twisted, branched. Once, a side passage exhaled a gust of wind so cold it turned Hermione's hair to brittle threads for a heartbeat. "We're under the downs now," she whispered, pressing a hand to the wall. "These tunnels, they're older than Hogwarts, and older than the Malfoys," Draco admitted. "Which means we're walking through someone else's nightmare." A sudden gust roared up from below, carrying with it a chorus of whispers, voices in a language that scraped against the mind. Hermione froze. "Don't listen," Draco warned, pulling her forward. "They'll latch on. They're hungry." The floor dropped sharply, and they half slid, half stumbled into a wider chamber. Bones, human and otherwise, littered the ground. Some dust, others still gleaming with a thin sheen of frost. At the far end, a narrow stone bridge spanned a chasm filled with swirling mist. "That's our way," Draco said, pointing. "And if it collapses? Then we die." He looked at her, gray eyes sharp in the dim light. "But not before I get you across." Hermione stared at him, really stared, seeing not the boy who'd called her mudblood, but the man who'd stood between her and a wraith with nothing but a silver dagger and a curse he barely remembered. She nodded. "Then let's go." They stepped onto the bridge. Halfway across, the stones began to tremble. Above them, the ceiling cracked open, and snow began to fall, not from the sky, but from the earth itself. The air tasted of iron and frost, each breath a knife in Hermione's lungs, as she staggered forward, her wand trembling in her grip. The great hall of the buried Fey court stretched around them, a cathedral of ice and shadow, its vaulted ceilings glittering with suspended shards that hummed like trapped spirits. She could feel the pulse of ancient magic beneath her boots, a slow, terrible rhythm that matched the drumming in her skull. Draco was ahead of her, a pale figure cut from moonlight, his voice low and urgent as he recited an incantation in a language that scraped against the edges of comprehension. "Stay close," he said, not turning. "They're testing us. The wards are reacting to doubt." "I'm not doubting," she snapped, though her voice wavered. Her fingers clenched around her wand, knuckles white. The runes she'd spent hours deciphering, etched into the frozen stone walls, had begun to glow as they passed, their meanings unraveling in her mind like threads from a frayed tapestry. But each revelation came at a cost. She could feel her magic stretching thin, unraveling like a rope pulled taut across a blade. A low groan echoed through the chamber. Then another. The ice cracked, soft at first, then louder, a network of fractures spreading across the ceiling. Draco whirled. "Move." He lunged toward her as a massive chandelier of ice sheared away from above, clashing down in a storm of crystalline shards. He shoved her aside, his shoulder taking the brunt of a glancing blow that sent him sprawling. Hermione cried out, scrambling to her knees, her vision swimming. The cold was inside her now, not just around her. It curled around her ribs, seeped into her marrow. "Get up," Draco growled, pushing himself onto one elbow. Blood streaked his temple, stark against his pale skin. "They're not done." But Hermione couldn't answer. Her wand slipped from her hand, clattering onto the frozen floor. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her body trembling not from cold, but from emptiness. She had poured everything into the wards, into breaking the first seal, into proving they were not mere intruders, but claimants under the old pact. The magic had answered, then devoured her in return. Granger. His voice sharpened. He crawled toward her, ignoring the blood, the ice. "Look at me," she tried, but the world tilted, the walls breathing in and out like a living thing. The runes she deciphered flickered in her mind, words of binding, of blood, of sacrifice. She remembered now. The pact hadn't been broken, it had been waiting, and the price was never gold or glory, was endurance. It was giving until there was nothing left. Draco caught her as she pitched forward, his arms closing around her with a strength she hadn't known he possessed. She felt the warmth of him, faint but real, like the last ember in a dying fire. "You idiot," he murmured, but his voice cracked. "You weren't supposed to give everything." She tried to smile. "Had to prove we belonged." "You belong." "He belong," he said, low and fierce. "Damn it, Hermione, stay with me." Above them, the ice shifted again. But this time the cracks slowed, the humming ceased. One by one, the runes along the walls flared, not with menace but with light soft and silver, like moonlight on snow. The court was listening. Not to power, not to bloodline, but to something quieter, something warmer. And in the silence that followed, Draco held her tighter, as if he could will his own breath into her lungs, his own pulse into her veins. The cold still lingered, but so did this fragile, impossible warmth between them, flickering like fire in the snow. The wind had stilled. That was the first thing Hermione noticed, the absence of the howl that had clawed at the edges of consciousness for days. No more ice tapping at the windows like skeletal fingers. No more groan of ancient oaks bowing under frozen weight. She rose from the chair by the hearth, her joints stiff from hours of vigil, had stepped barefoot across the cold stone floor. The fire had burned low, embers pulsing like a slowing heart, but the chill no longer bit. It was simply cool. Not the unnatural, marrow-deep freeze of the winter court's breath, but the honest cold of a late winter's dawn. She pushed the heavy oak door open. Mist curled across the fields of Wiltshire, silver in the first pale light. The snow was retreating, melting in soft rivulets down the hills, pooling in the hollows, revealing patches of damp earth, brown and raw. The air smelled of wet soil, of moss, of something stirring beneath the surface. A single bird called, a hesitant chirp, and then another answered from the copse beyond the manor's boundary. Hermione inhaled deeply, the warmth of her breath, a small visible cloud. It was real. The storm had broken. Behind her footsteps, soft, deliberate, Draco emerged from the shadows of the house, his cloak pulled tight, his face strong but alert. He stopped beside her, not speaking at first, just scanning the land. "It's thawing," he said at last, voice low. "It is," she replied. "The wards, they've changed, not broken, just altered." He nodded slowly. The court's hold has loosened, not gone, but it's no longer claiming everything. They stood in silence for a lone moment, two figures at the edge of a world reborn. The sky lightened from slate to pearl, then to a fragile gold along the horizon. The frost on the hedgerows glittered, not with menace now, but with the quiet beauty of morning. "I didn't think I'd see this again," Draco murmured. "Spring." Hermione glanced at him. His profile was sharp in the dawn light, the shadows beneath his eyes betraying sleepless nights, but there was something softer in the line of his jaw now, something unguarded. "We almost didn't," she said. He turned to her then, gray eyes meeting hers. "You were right, you know, about the pact, about the fire in the bloodline. My mother, she knew. Not all of it, but enough." Hermione exhaled. "We all carry pieces of the past. We just didn't know they were still alive." A rustle in the grass. A hare, old and brown, darted across the path and vanished into the brambles. Life returning, insistent. Draco took a step forward, then another, as if testing the earth. "The others will be waking soon. We'll need to send word to the ministry, to the other families." "Yes," she said, "but not yet. Not just yet." He looked back at her, surprised. "We stopped it," she said softly. "We stood in the heart of that ice, and we didn't break. We reminded ourselves, that warmth isn't weakness, that compassion, loyalty, even love, those are not things to be buried under frost." Draco's breath caught, just slightly. He looked away toward the rising sun, but not before she saw the flicker in his eyes. "I never thought I'd hear you say that," he admitted. "Love, not like it was a weapon." "Maybe it is," she said. "The oldest one of all." He turned back to her, and for the first time, there was no mask, no sarcasm, no legacy weighing down his voice. "Then perhaps we're not so lost after all." The mist began to lift, the fields glistened, and somewhere deep beneath the earth, the Fey court slept once more. But not forgotten, not unchallenged. Above, the sun climbed, and the world, scarred but breathing, reached toward the light. The last of the Fey dissolved like frost beneath morning light, their forms unraveling into silver mist that curled between the standing stones of the sunken glade. A hush settled over Wiltshire, thick and reverent, as if the earth itself held its breath. The air, once sharp with the scent of ice and elderflower, softened, warmer now, though still threaded with the ghost of winter. Beneath their feet, the frozen sigils carved into the stone began to fade, their glow dimming like dying embers. Only the silence remained, and the memory of voices that had sung in tongues older than Hogwarts. Hermione exhaled slowly, her breath a pale ribbon in the air. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the steady thud of her heart grounding her. It was over. Not with fire or fury, but with a sigh, a release. She turned to Draco, who stood a few paces away, his face tilted toward the sky, as though he expected snow to fall again. His silver-blonde hair caught the weak sunlight, almost glowing. He looked fragile in that moment, unguarded. "They're gone," he said, voice low, as if speaking too loud they might summon them back. "For now," Hermione corrected gently. "Not gone, just returned." He glanced at her, one eyebrow lifting. "Always so precise, Granger." She offered a tired smile. "Someone has to be." They had stood together at the center of the glade when the winter court awakened, bound not by magic, but by necessity. The ancient pact had demanded a blood offering, a tribute from the old families, but the true price had been understanding. Not sacrifice, but recognition. Acknowledgement of debts older than the ministry, older than the statute of secrecy. And in the end, it was not power that had broken the curse, but the simple defiant act of speaking the truth aloud, of naming the betrayal, the broken oaths, the centuries of silence. Draco had spoken for the Malfoys, voice steady, despite the frost crawling up his arms. Hermione, for the Muggle-born line the Fae had once called Children of the Open Door. Together, it had offered not blood, but memory. Now the land breathed again. The trees at the edge of the clearing trembled, their ice-laden branches shedding crystals like tears. A single raven called from the woods, its cry sharp and clear. Hermione stepped forward, her boots crunching on the thawing ground. She knelt, brushing her fingers over the place where the High Queen had stood. The stone was warm, unnaturally so, and beneath her touch, a single white flower pushed through the cracked earth, its petals delicate as moth wings. A snowdrop. Not of this season. Not of this time. Impossible, Draco murmured, crouching beside her. Not impossible, she whispered. Just remembered. He stared at the bloom, then at her. You knew this would happen, I hoped, she admitted. The stories, those in the Black Library, the ones even your mother didn't want. Read, they said that when the pacts are honored, the land remembers spring. A faint melody drifted on the wind, wordless and distant. Not a song of power, but of gratitude. Hermione closed her eyes, listening. It wove through the trees, through the mist, a lullaby sung in a language with no name. Around them the air shimmered, not with magic, but with the quiet return of life. A beetle crawled across the stone. A wren darted from the undergrowth. Draco stood, offering her his hand. She took it, and he pulled her gently to her feet. His fingers were cold, but his grip was firm. We should go, he said, before the Aurors decide this was dark magic, and show up with binding runes. She nodded but didn't let go of his hand. Not yet. Behind them, the snowdrop trembled, and for the briefest moment, the air filled with the scent of heather and frost-kissed apples. Then it was gone. They walked in silence toward the edge of the woods, shoulders brushing, the weight of what they'd done settling over them like a cloak. Not a burden, not a triumph. Something quieter, something real, and somewhere deep beneath the earth, a fey heart beat once, soft, slow, and no longer alone. Snow fell in slow, silent drifts over the skeletal trees of Malfoy Manor's east wing, where ivy once choked the stone and frostbite cracked the mortar. Now the air hummed, thin and crystalline, with something older than spells, older than memory. Draco stood at the edge of what had been the rose garden, his breath curling in pale wisps, as the earth beneath his boots shimmered faintly, like ice over deep water. The wards had shifted 3 nights ago. Not broken, no, that would have been chaos, but rewritten, as if the land itself remembered a language it hadn't spoken in 800 years. He knelt, gloved fingers brushing the frost. Beneath it the soil pulsed, not with warmth, but with presence. A fey root had taken hold here, silver-white and threaded with veins of moonlight. It wasn't invasive, it was returning. They're coming, he murmured, more to the wind than to anyone. And they'll need shelter. The manor had begun to change the moment the first frost bloomed on the library windows in July. Not decay, renewal. Cracks in the marble sealed overnight. The portrait of Abraxas Malfoy had gone silent, his painted eyes now fixed on the horizon, as if awaiting orders. The west tower long collapsed, now stood whole again, its spire piercing the low clouds like a needle of bone. Draco hadn't summoned them, but the blood in his veins, the old name, the old oaths, had answered something buried beneath Wiltshire's chalk hills. The winter court had stirred, and with it, the lesser fae, the exiled, the forgotten. They came in silence, a girl with antlers like birch branches who slept in the stables, wrapped in fox pelts, a boy with moth wings fused to his back, who whispered in a tongue that made the candles gutter, a court musician who played a harp of ice and never blinked. He found Hermione in the greenhouse at dawn, sleeves rolled to her elbows, fingers stained with crushed vervain and moonseed. She didn't look up as he entered, but the air tightened, just slightly, around her like a held breath. "You're letting them inside," she said, voice low. "I'm giving them walls," he replied. "The cold doesn't hurt them, but the ministry will, and so will wizards with wands, and no understanding." She finally looked at him, dark eyes, sharp beneath the smudge of sleeplessness. "You're not their keeper, Draco." "No," he admitted, "but I'm the only one with a roof. They won't freeze, and a name they recognize." She exhaled, slow and measured. "The wards you're weaving, they're not just protective, they're binding. They're balanced," he corrected. "Offering, not demanding. The old pacts were about tribute. This is truce." Outside, the first light of day bled across the snow, but it didn't melt. It deepened, turning the grounds into a lattice of silver and shadow. A shape moved at the tree line, tall, slender, crowned with frost. One of the winter's emissaries. Watching. Hermione set down her mortar. "You're risking everything, your family name, your freedom. If the ministry sees this as alliance, they'll see a house reopening," he interrupted. "A noble gesture, refuge for the displaced, which, incidentally, is true." She almost smiled. Almost. You always did twist truth like ribbon. And you always trusted facts more than feeling, he said softly. But tell me, Granger, when was the last time logic explained why the roses bloom black now? Or why the well water sings at midnight? She didn't answer, couldn't. Because logic had its limits. And magic, true magic, had just woken up. A gust rattled the glass. Somewhere in the house, a door opened on its own. Then faintly, laughter, high and chime-like, drifting down the hall. Draco turned toward the sound, his breath catching. Not fear, not pride, something quieter, something new. They're not afraid anymore, he said, and for the first time neither was he. The quill scratched across parchment in steady rhythm, a metronome against the silence of the library annex. Moonlight poured through the high-arched windows, spilling silver over stacks of open tomes, their spines cracked with age and their pages whispering secrets when turned. Hermione sat hunched over a low oak table, her fingers smudged with ink, her hair escaping its loose knot in wisps that curled around her temples. Outside, the grounds of Malfoy Manor lay still beneath a thin veil of frost, the garden statues half buried in snow, their stone eyes glistening like frozen tears. She wrote in precise looping script, summarizing the latest findings, the alignment of fey sigils beneath the Wiltshire chalk hills, the resurgence of frost marks on ancient standing stones, the way certain wizarding bloodlines, herself excluded, had begun to feel the pull of the Winter Court's summons. She detailed the wards weakening, the anomalies in magical weather patterns, the reports from Hogsmeade of breath turning to ice at midnight. Everything, except what had passed between her and Draco in the hollow beneath the barrow. Her quill paused. She stared at the sentence she'd just written. Subject responded to fey resonance with elevated pulse and minor magical discharge, consistent with ancestral recognition. That was all, clinical, distant. Not a word about the way his hand had trembled when the ruse flared blue, or how his breath had caught when the voice, cold and ancient, had whispered his name from the dark. Not a word about how she'd reached for him, instinctive, and how he hadn't pulled away. She dipped the quill again, blotting excess ink. The fire in the hearth flickered, casting shadows that danced like wraiths across the walls. She remembered the warmth of his shoulder against hers as they crouched in the earth-carved chamber, the scent of frost and old parchment clinging to his cloak. He had recited the old vow in flawless high fey, voice low and steady, though she'd felt the tension in his arm, the unspoken fear beneath the pride. And when the ice had begun to spread from the altar, creeping toward them like a living thing, it was his hand that found hers, not in panic, but in silent agreement. She exhaled long and slow. The memory shimmered at the edge of her thoughts, fragile as breath on glass. Her notes mentioned the linguistic shift in Malfoy's speech when under fey influence. They recorded the correlation between the Malfoy lineage and the forgotten oath of tribute. They even referenced the protective charm he'd unconsciously cast, silver light, like frost burning backward into air, when the spirit of the Winter Herald first appeared. But they did not say, "He looked at me as if I were the only source of warmth left in the world." She turned the page, forcing her focus back to the facts, the data. The ministry required detachment. Yet her mind wandered to the quiet moments after, when they'd sat by the fire in the manor's east wing, wrapped in thick wool, sipping tea that did little to warm the chill in their bones. He had spoken then, not of duty or blood, but of his mother's whispered warnings, of dreams he'd had since childhood. Endless winter, a silver throne, a woman with eyes like frozen stars who called him home. Hermione had listened, not as an investigator, not as an Auror consultant, but as someone who saw for the first time the weight he carried, not just the shame of his family, but the burden of a legacy older than Hogwarts, older than Merlin's time. She closed the ledger gently, pressing her palm flat against the cover. Outside, the wind sighed through the trees, and somewhere deep beneath the earth, ancient magic stirred, patient and cold. And she wrote nothing of the way her heart had clenched when he said, "I don't want that throne, Granger. I just want this world to stay alive." The spring air in Wiltshire carried the scent of thawed earth and wild garlic, the fields soft beneath her boots, as Hermione Granger stepped over a fallen branch slick with moss. The woods had changed since last winter. The bark of the ancient oaks shimmered faintly in the afternoon light, as if dusted with frost that refused to melt. She paused, breath curling in front of her like smoke, and pressed a gloved hand against the trunk of the nearest tree. Beneath her palm, the wood hummed, a low resonant thrum that echoed in her bones. It wasn't magic as she knew it, not wand work or spellcraft, but something older, slower, like the pulse of a sleeping giant. She hadn't meant to come back, not really, but for weeks, a quiet pull had tugged at the edge of her thoughts, like a half-remembered lullaby, or the warmth of sunlight just out of reach. It had followed her from London, through dreams of silver leaves and voices speaking in a language just beyond understanding. And then, one morning, she'd found herself packing a satchel with parchment, a thermos of tea, and her mother's woolen scarf, without deciding to go at all. The path ahead narrowed, winding between stone outcrops veiled in ivy. She knew this trail now, though it hadn't existed in December. Back then, the ground had been iron-hard, the trees encased in ice, and the sky a bruised violet that never quite let in the sun. Now buds clung to bare branches, and the wind carried the faint chime of something. Bells? Glass, hanging from unseen branches. And then she saw him. Draco Malfoy stood at the edge of a small clearing, his back to her, silver blonde hair catching the light like spun thread. He wore a long charcoal-gray coat, its collar turned up against the lingering chill, and one hand rested lightly on the hilt of a dagger at his belt. Fey steel, cold to the touch and humming with quiet power. He didn't turn, but she knew he'd sensed her. The air shifted when she stepped into the clearing, the faint shimmer in the trees deepening, as if the forest itself was watching. "You're late," he said, voice low, almost gentle. She stopped a few paces behind him. "I didn't know I was expected." "You've been dreaming of this place," he said simply. "They've been calling you. You just didn't realize it was an invitation." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I didn't think they invited anyone." A pause. Then he turned, and she saw the change in his eyes, once pale gray, now threaded with frost-blue veins like cracks in ice, revealing something luminous beneath. He looked tired, haunted, but not unkind. "They don't," he said. "Not usually. But you offered warmth when there was none, when I had none." She remembered that night, the ritual beneath the frozen court, the way she'd pressed her hand to his chest, pouring her own magic, her own breath, into him as the Winter Queen's curse took hold. She hadn't known if it would work. She hadn't known if he'd survive. But he had, and something between them had shifted, like a door left ajar in a sealed house. "I didn't do it for the court," she said quietly. "I know." He stepped closer, just enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his irises. "That's why it mattered." A breeze stirred, lifting the scent of damp stone and something faintly floral, impossible this early. From the trees above, tiny lights flickered, like fireflies, but colder, bluer. Fey lanterns, perhaps, or memories given form. "They're waking," he said. "Not just the court. The land remembers, and it remembers you." She swallowed. "What do they want?" He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something like hope in his gaze. "Not tribute," he said. "Not this time. They want balance. And you're part of that now, whether you like it or not." She exhaled, watching her breath fog the air between them. "Then I suppose," she said, "I'd better stay." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Welcome back, Granger." And somewhere deep beneath the earth, the ice cracked, not in warning, but in relief. The wind howled through the cracked stone arches of the abandoned watchtower, carrying with it the scent of frost and something older, something sharp like crushed starlight and dry winter bark. Snow fell in slow spirals, not quite touching the ground before vanishing into silver mist, as if the air itself resisted winter's claim. Hermione stood at the edge of the crumbling parapet, her breath curling in pale threads, her fingers clenched around the brittle pages of the translated grimoire. The ink shivered faintly, reacting to the latent magic in the air, words shifting like fish beneath ice. "You're going to catch your death," Draco said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade wrapped in velvet. She didn't turn. "I'm already half frozen. Death would be an improvement." A dry chuckle. He stepped beside her, his silhouette sharp against the bruised twilight. His cloak, black of course, but threaded with silver that caught the low light, fluttered like the wing of some great bird. He held something cupped in his gloved hands, small and delicate, glowing faintly from within. "What's that?" she asked, wary. Draco hesitated. Then slowly he removed one glove and opened his palm. Resting there was a flower. But not of this world. Its petals were made of ice, translucent, layered like crystal snowflakes. But they did not melt. They shimmered with a soft internal light, pale blue at the edges, deepening to a warm gold at the heart. A faint heat radiated from its center, barely enough to feel, but unmistakable against the biting cold. "It's an ice flower," he said quietly, "from the winter court's inner gardens. They grow only where sorrow and magic freeze together." Hermione stared. "Why would you bring that here?" "Because it's yours," he said, offering it to her. She blinked. "Mine? When the court summoned the bloodlines," yours answered. "Not by name. There was no Granger in the old treaties, but by magic. Your power resonated with the pact. I felt it when we stood in the hollow beneath the stones. The earth trembled not for me, but for you. That's impossible. I'm Muggle-born." He gave a faint, bitter smile. "Magic doesn't care about bloodlines, Granger. Not really. It remembers bonds, sacrifices, love. The ice flowers blew where something warm was lost, and this one, it grew the night you cast that shield in the Forbidden Forest. The one that saved Potter. The one that nearly killed you." Her breath caught. "I didn't know," she whispered. "No one did. Not even me, until last night. I went back to the archives beneath Malfoy Manor. Old spells, older promises. The court doesn't take tribute blindly. It takes what's already given. What's already tied to winter by sacrifice." She reached out, then paused. "Will it burn me?" "No. It knows your warmth. It's been waiting for it." Slowly, she touched a petal. It didn't cut. It didn't freeze. Instead, it pulsed, once, like a heartbeat. A jolt ran through her, not of pain, but of memory. Her mother's hand smoothing her hair before school, Ron's laugh in the common room, Harry's hand pulling her from the lake, Draco bleeding in the bathroom, her spell the only thing holding him together. Tears stung her eyes. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because they'll ask for it," he said, voice low. "The court, they'll want the flower, want you. And if I don't stand with you when they come, then all this," he gestured to the sky, "the snow, the silent land beyond, will turn to ice. Even you won't survive a winter with no spring." She looked at him, really looked. Not the boy who mocked her, not the man bound by legacy, but the one who had walked through fire and frost to stand here, offering her a piece of magic that remembered her. "Then we'll face it together," she said. The flower flared, golden at its core, like a spark catching in the wind. The sun rose over the Wiltshire downs like a slow unfurling of gold, gilding the long grass and warming the stones that had only weeks before wept frost at midnight. The air carried the scent of wild thyme and dry earth, a far cry from the bitter, silver-laced winds that had howled through the valleys when the winter court first stirred beneath the land. Now, silence, soft and drowsy, had settled into the hollows where ice once sang. The Fae were not gone, not truly, but they had withdrawn, sinking once more into their ageless slumber beneath the roots of ancient oaks and the bones of forgotten hills. Hermione stood barefoot at the edge of the hollow, the grass warm between her toes. She watched the mist curl and dissolve above the standing stones, their carvings now faint, as if the land itself was exhaling, releasing the weight of centuries. A robin landed on one of the mossy monoliths, tilting its head at her, as though it too remembered the night when shadows danced with frost and time bent under the breath of the Winter Queen. She heard footsteps behind her, light, deliberate. Draco. He came to stand beside her, hands tucked into the pockets of his coat, though he no longer wore it buttoned against the cold. His hair caught the morning light, pale as ash, and she noticed, not for the first time, how much younger he looked, without the constant tension in his jaw. "It's quiet," he said, voice low. "Too quiet?" she asked, glancing at him. He considered the question, his gaze sweeping the horizon. "No, just right," she smiled faintly. They had spent weeks unraveling spells older than Hogwarts, translating runes beneath moonlight that turned their breath to vapor. They had stood side by side before the Winter Queen, their wands lowered not in surrender, but in offering. Hermione with her knowledge of blood oaths, Draco with his name etched into the old pacts. They'd given words, not weapons, promises, not power, and the frost had receded. "It's strange," she said, "how something so vast can retreat like a tide, as if it were never meant to stay." "Maybe it wasn't," he replied. "Maybe it only wanted to be remembered." A breeze stirred the hem of her cloak, lifting the faded green fabric. His, lent to her during the coldest nights. She hadn't returned it. He hadn't asked. She turned to him then, really looked. The shadows under his eyes had softened. There was a crease at the corner of his mouth now when he was thoughtful. Something new, something real. "You were right," she said, "about the pact, about the tribute not being blood but memory, honor." He gave a small shrug. "I only remembered what my grandmother used to say, that the old magic doesn't feed on fear, it feeds on truth." She nodded, and we gave it truth. Silence settled again, but it was not empty. It was full of birdsong, of wind through grass, of the quiet understanding that had grown between them like ivy on stone, slow, persistent, impossible to ignore. After a long moment he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver charm, a snowflake, delicate as frost, but warm in the sun. "I found it buried near the inner circle," he said. "It didn't melt." She took it from him, rolling it between her fingers. "A token? Or a reminder," he said softly, "that even winter leaves something behind." She looked up, meeting his gray eyes, no longer cold, but clear, like dawn over a thawing lake. "And what do we leave behind, Draco?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer at once. Then slowly, he covered her hand with his, the charm caught between their palms. "Something warmer," he said. "A something that lasts.